All right. Hello, everybody. We're back for the 2024 to 2025 season. Another year for the HFFL. Of course, we have Dustin.
Uh, Nice to be back. Good to get another year started, and congratulations up front for being the champion of last year.
Thank you.
That's two now, right? You're one behind the top three now, and in your own category, I believe, because there's no one else with two other than no one else with multiple other than you, Virginia, Great Kills, and Long Island City, I believe.
Yeah, it's a crazy. First of all,
Yeah,
it's
exclusive club.
crazy. Yeah, it's a,
Yeah.
I think it's been a crazy ride in general that year. So yeah, thanks for that, and in some ways still can't believe it, but I think we'll talk about it when we talk about this year. But
Yeah.
there's gonna be
Yeah.
a hangover effect for sure, I think. But and that's sometimes the way that my mind works. I kind of just move on real fast and try to
hmm
think about the next year and try to make sure
Yeah,
that
you gotta
I
you
can
gotta
compete.
roll with everything. Yeah.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. But yeah, just trying to do my best, obviously, and still need to do some work to catch up to you guys ahead of me. So definitely not, doing massive cartwheels or anything like that.
Mhm.
Um, we do have also on the line Diaz as our guest.
Hey team.
Super excited to have you as usual for this first show. I think this is our first show, right? Yeah, this is our first
It
show
is. It is. Yeah.
for the
Our
year.
first official. I mean, I think lottery was maybe kind of
Yeah,
streamed, but it was like you laughing to yourself
yeah.
on a
That's right.
call.
That's right. That's
But
right.
yeah, it's always I think fun to see the simulations outcome, and it leads kind of nicely into what people expected to see from the auction draft and how it actually turned out and how we kind of foresee that playing out overall during the season this year. So, well, yeah, welcome Diaz. Should be a really fun show.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And let me just pull up that this simulation because this is what Diaz always does, right? He's every year bringing out the simulations for us, showing a glimpse into the future, or what was the future at the time, and then is now potentially reality. So this is one of the mock drafts that you guys did. Could you take us through it, Diaz, and kind of highlight some key points from this?
Yeah, just some like general thoughts before we like jump into each team specifically. Just kind of some friends or something you were surprised with, or stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. It's being shared. Where should I be looking? Oh, in the link,
Uh,
right?
if you look at the link that Wankyu sent in general, the video is streaming right now, so you can kind of
Got it,
follow
got it,
along.
got it.
You should probably mute the
No
YouTube
problem.
video so you don't get feedback. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So a couple things. Running backs. Everybody needed multiple, or almost everybody needed multiple running backs. So it was something we were watching to see just how high the prices would go and whether people would let up at a certain tier. Um, and of course, quarterback for our own reasons. We needed to make sure we got a quarterback, and because so many were being kept, there were only so many opportunities to go get a guy. And this year is relatively unique because Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes were available in the auction, which has never happened before in their careers. Um, so we were very curious to see and try to guess how other managers would value those players. Um, and yeah, so we built out some mocks and tried to see what it would be like if we went after some of the high priced guys, or if if those guys became unattainable for us because they went beyond our price range, how things would look in that instance.
Hmm. I just want to ask a kind of specific question. Um, so I think recently, especially in the last like couple of years, um, zero RB is like becoming, obviously year by year a bigger deal as like there are more split backfields and committees, and sometimes their strategies called like hero RB, where you kind of like go for one big swing at like a pretty big stud at running back, and then try to fill it out cheap. But I think the general trend in a lot of like fantasy advice I see is that like running backs are splitting more than often. Wide receivers are actually like kind of where a lot of the strength of teams are built because of the rise of PPR and stuff. Do you think you saw something similar in our league? Obviously, our format is very different, so I don't expect it to kind of go the way like the fantasy community seems to be kind of like trending in many ways. But yeah, I was just curious if you kind of thought our league was closer to that than you expected, or like further away and for good reason. Like, yeah, just some thoughts on that.
I would say this year, I think we saw teams unwilling or uninterested to try a zero RB or hero RB approach.
Uh-huh.
Um, the extra flex, so you can
Uh-huh.
start 3 running backs. That makes a big
Yes.
difference, I think.
Yes.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, because the league is deeper, it's a little bit harder to find guys
Mm-hmm.
on waivers if you're out looking.
Yep.
So yeah, I think the managers were smart, and they said, and look, they looked at previous champions, and they said, well, these guys rostered players like Christian McCaffrey.
Yep.
They rostered these great running backs, and if I want to do the same thing, then I've got to go out and get that guy too.
Yeah, just one I think really important point about what you just said is that since we do kind of like pseudo start 3 running backs where a lot of leagues start 2, um, yeah, split backfields kind of make it so that they're like 40-ish to like mid 40s startable guys, even if it like kind of like plateaus and flattens out like a little bit earlier than it used to because there are less bell cows at the top. So in other leagues, like completely waiting on running back, you still have your pick at like that like guys in that 45 that are like either valuable members of a split or something like that. But in our league, with 3 starters per, and everyone like having like mechanisms to hoard guys that might break out later. I don't think that same availability is there on waivers or like easily accessible on trade. So yeah, I think that's like a pretty big point on why running back values might stay more afloat in our league than the standard formats that a lot of people give fantasy advice for. So yeah, I think that part is like actually very pertinent to like our specific league and how it differs from others.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one thing to remember is you have to build a roster that wins, right? So you have to put together the team, and sometimes I'm not sure if I go into too much detail thinking about all of that, but
Mm-hmm.
you have to have a winning strategy, right?
Yes.
Whatever
Yeah.
that is
Mm-hmm.
and also it needs to suit you, whatever you do better than other people.
Yep.
But um, and that's a separate thing entirely. But that's sometimes what I always remember. And I remember bringing this up maybe a year or 2 years ago too, winning the flex, right? I think that's always so
Mm-hmm.
important in this league.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I realize, and again, a lot of people have different strategies. Sometimes it's about winning from the QB position. Sometimes it's about
Mm-hmm.
winning from your tight end. A lot of people like that strategy as well in our league, and so
Right. Because yeah,
it's an
so these
interesting
are
thing.
like
Yeah.
like with tight ends, there's the idea that there's a very finite number that people are going to start. So acquiring one, if you're like, really into dregs, is always going to be a little bit harder because there are, less people with a supply of, especially in past years, right? So like, I understand the idea of like, oh, I want to win the tight end spot, and then like, I'm gonna manage to kind of fill like everything else and like get it to a point where my advantages win out, and then QBs is also another good one with our superflex format and our scoring format. There's definitely a lot of consistency that comes with having 2 or high powered quarterbacks in general. And yeah, like I like all these strategies sound pretty viable and like they make sense, right? I think you can make an argument even with like running back, there's only like maybe 7 or 8 guys that really kind of get the touches without like splitting like valuable touches. So like maybe you want to win by getting like 2 of those guys and then like building around that. So like it's actually kind of crazy how I think valid so many different like team building strategies are, and I think we saw that in this year's draft too.
Yeah, and I think it also changes year to year. That's the other thing that's tricky, is that there are
Mm-hmm,
years where you have a lot of value at a certain position, and so you can
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
give way. You can go zero, whatever it is,
mm-hmm.
and try to get that value late. Now, I
Yep.
think we all said this, but with the running backs, it's hard to do zero at running back. I think
Yes. Yeah.
maybe some of us, or maybe all of us, have tried it, but it's not easy to do. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
you're just banging your head against the wall the whole
Yeah.
season if you do that.
Yeah.
So you need at least one. I would definitely recommend a hero, and that's ultimately what I think I did
Mm-hmm.
in this year's. But you have to at minimum do that, and at worst you can just pound it. And I think a lot of people in our league, especially, love the running
Mm-hmm.
back position. I don't know if you've
Yes.
noticed that, Diaz, but that's just something with our league that's very unique, I think.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. A big thing that we experienced in Sandy Pines last season was having 4 starting running backs or like startable guys, and having a problem ch- uh, changing one of them in a trade
Mm-hmm.
into like a wide receiver because we needed that depth there. Um,
Oh,
uh,
interesting.
yeah, which informed our draft strategy, but um, it's always it's a supply and demand thing, so it shifts, week to week or year to year. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out now that the teams have planted their flags in various running backs.
Yeah, that's interesting. So last year you're saying you had too many running backs, but not enough wide receivers to fill your spot for your starting lineup.
Right. Yeah. So it's a
Yeah.
like so this year, if you took a look at our draft, we drafted we spent very very little money on running backs, because it's when you have more receivers on your bench, it's much more flexible for to fill your lineup. And that's something that we wanted to see if we could get to work this year.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. I
I
think a lot
love
of
it.
people are
Yeah.
thinking that way too, for
Yeah, yeah,
sure.
yeah. That's
I
one
think
of
the
my
problem
favorite strategies too. But
yeah,
yeah, go ahead, Dustin.
problem was also twofold last year for Sandy Pines. Like, yeah, they had like 4 pretty startable running backs, but the ones that were supposed to like pop and be like top 3 type of running backs didn't. So they ended up kind of having like 4 guys like that most teams should be starting. But they were really also stung by the fact that Eckler had the season he did. Bijan was definitely a little bit disappointing compared to expectations at least. And ETN was good and stuff, but like they really kind of needed one of those guys to be a hero running back, and probably a decent argument that they were either a little bit short or at least a little bit underwhelming compared to what expectations might have been. So yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with the idea that like wide receivers give you a lot of flexibility to like start 4, start 5. Like it is definitely, I think, something that a lot of teams are thinking of. So
Yeah, and I think that's one of the ways that my team won last year. I don't even remember who
Mhm.
my hero running back was, if there was any. It was
You
Mostert,
didn't have
probably.
one. You got
Yeah.
Mostert. Yeah,
Yeah.
Mostert showed up as a hero, which was awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, it was other like, and him. I got him really late as a $9, $10 player.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think with that in mind, maybe that also dictated some of the strategy for this year, since that was a recent example that ended up working out, right? So
Hmm.
we'll see. I think it's going to be very interesting. Should
Ah,
be very
there's
competitive.
our first.
The
We'll
first
see. There's
one,
our first. We'll see. All right,
20
everybody
minutes
drink,
in.
and then we can finally start the show and the season for real. Like everybody was definitely waiting for that one.
I wanted to ask Diaz specifically as well. I believe you had the first nomination.
Hmm.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, you put Lamar. You did that.
And
Yeah.
What was
It
the thought
wasn't.
process? Yeah.
So it was important to us to understand the market for quarterback, um,
mm,
and I wanted to see a player who would fetch a high salary, um, but also not necessarily like if we didn't like how things turned out, possibly maintain the opportunity to get Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes. And the
Mm-hmm.
value when you're looking for a quarterback and the salary is high is a lot of people have an opportunity to bid. So you can see which teams are interested in investing in quarterback, and then you
Mm-hmm.
can use that knowledge to determine whether they're likely to be competing with you for other players in the future.
Right, right.
I
I think it's
see.
always nice to know, like, if you kind of feel out the, that tier, and then you can kind of early pivot if you see, like, sometimes it's obviously wrong because you're like, oh, okay, this tier is like, anchoring pretty high. We probably don't want to play in that price range, and then you start like spending your money on like other areas of your team because you're like kind of like in your mind passing, not holding the money for like that spot anymore. But then, yeah, sometimes it does come back to bite you, and then like the last guy in that tier goes like unexpectedly cheap. But you're right that like if you see who's bidding, you can kind of at least see like, okay, like if whoever doesn't get this one, there's no real reason they'd be out on like this similarly valued guy like just a bit later, right? So I think yeah, that's like very good in draft strategy to kind of like know if you should pre-pivot or if you're really going to have a realistic chance. That kind of playing in that tier.
This year, it was very important because there were two quarterbacks who were kept who I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't sure if their managers considered them starters or bench players. Geno Smith and Bryce Young,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're
Mm,
sort of on the borderline if you go by,
Yep.
ECR of like top 20. And so, if, for example, Jay considers Bryce Young a starter, he also has Jared Goff kept. He's not going to be competing with me for any quarterback that's a significant investment.
yeah.
And then
Mm-hmm.
same thing with Matt and Dustin. They only came in with the one keeper, but I could still determine how aggressively they wanted to go after quarterback or what kind of quarterback they wanted to go after, so that I
Mm-hmm.
could, we could see how the Tua strategy would unfold. If like it's not going to work if those guys are bidding him up, but if those guys don't really want to spend on quarterback, then it could work.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that was the big deal for this draft, and really for any draft for our league. It is the QB for me, right? You center your strategy, you figure out what you're doing based off of how
Yeah.
much you're gonna invest in your QBs. Then you can start
Mm-hmm.
to see where you're gonna go with the rest of your money. But I think yeah, it's really smart by you to understand what other teams are doing first for their QB positions, and then moving from there to dictate your strategy. So yeah, kudos to that. That's really awesome. So I'm guessing it worked out for you. I'm wondering, what were any surprises that caught you off guard, Diaz, in the draft? And I'll ask you too,
Uh,
Dustin, after.
Yeah, I mean, we can look at the numbers here and see which players are the furthest away from what they actually went for. So like Debo, I think you did very well with that Wankyu. I had him ranked quite a bit higher. It was very interesting with San Francisco, right? Because Brandon Ayuk had questions about when he was going to play or if he was going to play or be on that team, and so I believe that depressed his auction value. But if people are questioning his availability, then that means they should have increased confidence in the other weapons on that team. And I didn't see that. Like, people are assuming, okay, Brandon Ayuk's not going to get targets from Brock Purdy. So where are they going to go? Because they weren't willing to spend $37 on Debo Samuel. They weren't willing to spend $15 on George Kittle. CMC I think went for a fair price. It's not like they're saying, oh, he's going to get 150 targets. So I think it was a big win to get him at that value. And also Drake London, I was surprised people were out on him. I understand that he could be polarizing, but you could see the upside, in my view. And traditionally, that's something that I feel is very attractive. So, a player who's ascending, who finally, quote unquote, has the quarterback, um, seemed like something that a lot of people would want to be in on. But the timing, maybe of his nomination, or the fact that he does appear to have some holes in his game, people weren't really biting.
Yeah,
I think
just
it is half timing and also half polarizing. Yeah, like some people, yeah, I think Atlanta's one of the situations where it's like yeah, like Kirk Cousins always supports a good wide receiver, and like there aren't that many targets other than the two that most people are going to think of. But I think also some people are like, okay, Kirk Cousins is 35, coming off an Achilles, and switching teams for an old quarterback tends to kind of be a catalyst for a complete fall apart. I'm not sure if this is going to apply here, but we've seen it before with Matt Ryan or Philip Rivers. Obviously, I think Cousins was doing a little bit better than them before then, but he's also coming off a pretty major injury, and like I said, the team changing thing tends to be kind of a catalyst for if you do see a big decline, like a big decline. So I think definitely some people are pretty confident in Kirk being Kirk, and then I think some people have legitimate concerns about you know if Kirk Cousins isn't like a huge volume guy, like people might be over prescribing the jump that Drake London or Pitts are going to make. So I think it's a little bit of both. I think some people probably were still believers, but by the time those guys were nominated, they had kind of spent their money elsewhere. And I do think probably a few people were like, I don't have a good enough feeling about Atlanta as an offense to really choose this place to plant my flag. But yeah, I do agree. Like the upside is obviously huge. So definitely a will see situation there.
Yeah, just quickly for reference, Debo Samuel went for 36. It's 47 in the simulation. Drake London went for 34. It's 53 in the simulation. And I see a couple of other places too. I think Ayuk, you mentioned, he went for 29. And I think you have him at like 30. Where is he? 38.
Yeah, 38.
38
And
in
DK
this.
Metcalf right next to him too went for more than I thought.
DK Metcalf was 44 in this one. Where is he in the real? I don't know where he is. I have no idea which team he's not even on. Oh, I see him for 30. Wow. Yeah, so there's a big difference. I think there's a number of things that are different when you look at reality versus your simulation. I wonder where you underestimate it, right? Because if there's these discrepancies in one direction, it should be offset.
Well, Justin Fields went for 9.
Yeah, but that's like a difference of like eight or seven at best, right? So like, was there anything that was like over 15 more than you kind of?
Yeah. Where's the more coming from?
Yeah, there has to be a couple pretty big mores. I feel like so.
I think what did you put? Brees Hall, Saquon Barkley.
The running backs.
Yeah, maybe
A little bit, yeah, kind of, yeah, across the board in that hero. Yeah, so like, yeah, I think some people kind of did get into like the hero running back and then build out from their strategy for a bit, for sure, I think.
Yeah, it goes back to what Dustin said. It's ugly when you start looking at the running backs.
Mm-hmm.
After like 7 of them, it's terrible. So you gotta go make your pick early on that and put money in it, right? Invest in that position. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get surprised by anything, Dustin, when you were in the draft? I can share mine too when I.
Yeah. No, I mean, for the most part, I can kind of see how a lot of teams are thinking. So I do think that this year, maybe more than others, there's a lot of polarizing kind of team situations. Because I think there have been a significant number of offensive coordinator changes, or so it feels like. It's a little bit hard to project out just kind of based on what you think the offensive coordinator is going to change. So, some people have very different views on, Tampa Bay, as we discussed, Atlanta Falcons, Seahawks are one of those teams. I think our Steelers, obviously. I mean, there's a bunch. I'm probably not even like capturing all of them, but I kind of see like some of these guys, like I think went for more money than I would have. But then it's usually one of those situations where I'm like, oh, I can see like, okay, there's like a QB change or an offensive coordinator change that this team believes in more than I do, right? Or vice versa. I see a guy go for cheaper, and I'm like, oh, I guess they don't really, think that this new offensive coordinator makes difference and stuff. So I think that was really the trend that I kind of came away with this this draft, like I was like kind of noticing it all over the place. Like at first, I'm always like, there's guys where I'm like, oh, whoa, like really, like are people really that into this guy? And then it's usually like those situations where there's a QB change or a pretty big trade that like brought a piece over, or an offensive coordinator change that people are kind of like reading into their own ways. But I love it because I think like everybody's like thinking critically for themselves, and we're getting like a lot of different opinions. It's not just like fantasy outlet says like this guy is projected to be top 15, so like I'm just gonna kind of like stick to that. Like people are kind of definitely kind of making their own judgment calls on a lot of different situations.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to for both of you guys in terms of the pricing and some of the surprises,
Hmm.
I don't necessarily think it's like a big call on how people are judging the production and everything. I think sometimes it
Yeah.
does come down to the timing and the
Hmm.
usage of the budget that you have, right? I think sometimes it comes
Yep.
down to also the people who are left. Let's say it's like
Yep.
I'm just gonna make up like Chu and Hua left over having the big stack, and then becomes those two people's opinions, and the rest become bystanders, right? So I think that's why there are some of these discrepancies that happen in the middle or near the end of the draft, that could surprise everyone else, but to Chu and Hua, who are the ones who have the money, they dictate the price at the end of the day, right? So
Yep.
that's just what happens.
I think in my last meta analysis on
Yeah.
our league and draft, I think there was a period of a few years before like this current era where having kind of a rigid plan, as long as it was kind of like really well structured, I think kind of worked because like you could kind of force your way into kind of a pretty tight like team structure. Like I want like one of these, I want one of these, right? But I think nowadays like being fluid and adaptable is like really important now because like you said, it depends so much on like flow of draft, and like people are changing their strategy year to year. Like getting stuck in like as the big stack at the end of the draft with John Duho and yourself is a completely different situation than any other two members, right? So like all of a sudden you had planned to like pick away at certain guys, and then all of a sudden the end of the draft isn't kind of acting out the way you want it to. So I think people are like getting caught off guard and leaving money on the board again, or kind of like you know going a little bit too short. Like I think a lot of people have found that like the rigid strategies are getting a little bit tougher to do, and like fluidity, adaptability, kind of like knowing when the flow of the draft is shifting. I think that's like very important these days.
Yeah, yeah, it's a key skill. I completely agree. I completely agree.
Hmm.
I think for me, the biggest surprise is kind of tied to that. I think even from the onset, because when I was entering this draft, and I think this has been true for many of the previous years, is to think about values, think about picking up players for cheap a little bit, and trying to fill out your entire roster, right? And build depth. I think that was one of
Yeah.
the key things that I wanted to do. Again, same as I thought from last year and the year before. But then I think immediately I realized that I don't think I could do that anymore.
Mm.
Especially
Yeah.
looking at the QB prices. So I was like, okay,
Yeah.
then we're gonna go back to, and this is also something that I've done in the past too. So I was pretty comfortable getting a
Yeah.
top QB,
It's
getting a
huge.
top
It's
running
huge
back. So
that
I
it's
adapted,
huge to
right?
have the ability to adapt mid draft, because sometimes it's daunting. You're like kind of like stunned and like stun locked, and you're like, oh wait,
Oh
this is
yeah.
like not what I was expecting. And sometimes you end up like completely bombing like half your draft because you're just like, oh wait, like I totally expected like to get this tier of like wide receiver for this much. I'm gonna wait for like like there's like different flows and like shifts within the draft that you need to kind of like be able to assess and adapt to. Otherwise, you really get caught out. So I think a lot of people have gotten like better at that as a skill. So like I think people are adapting more than ever, but I still think that's like probably like the leading meta skill for drafting like nowadays. Like back then, I think it was just like kind of having a really good sense of like value and knowing where you wanted to like hit your guys, right? Like knowing kind of what sections of like you know each position you kind of like wanted to like hit, and having some like really good sleepers and like stuff to like kind of just fill out depth. But now I think you kind of have to take what the draft has given you a lot more.
Yeah, it makes someone like Diaz, who has a plan A, plan B, plan C,
Mm,
like that helps you out, right? I think
yeah,
also it helps when you're
simulations. Yeah.
yeah, or if you're like I don't want to put this person on the spot, but I'm guessing someone like Duho, who may not even prepare much, is just like fuck it,
Mhm.
I'm winging it, I'm just doing whatever,
Yeah.
and that can help too, right? Because you don't have a strategy, you're not set on any
Yeah.
ways, right? But then there
Uh-huh.
are some folks who come in with the set strategy and just try
Right.
to execute that. That could hurt you potentially.
Yeah.
In,
Like
in,
I
in,
know
in a tough
specifically,
year.
like
Yeah.
yeah, it's happened. It's happened a little bit to me, and but like I
Ah.
know John had a year where he was kind of like preset on like starting the draft with like two or three core players, and then like he had a plan for like what he was gonna like hit down the road, and then like it just didn't play out the way he thought, and he kind of got like really caught out. Like there was a stretch where he was getting like ninth, eighth, like seventh, like pretty much like 3 years in a row, I think, right? But I do know that he had like kind of like adjusted to that, and had like, when we're talking like pre-draft fantasy, like, he's talking a lot more about like, being able to like, okay, I'm gonna like try for this, and then like my pivots are this, and like I think I like the value here, but in case it's not, like, like everybody I think has evolved to a level where it's not, no one's getting like caught out too bad anymore. But yeah, I think that skill is kind of what separates how good people's auction drafts turn out, and you know we
Yeah.
see it this year. I think, yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I think it's wonderful. It's amazing. And yeah, I mean, this part of the year, this draft, the auction, it's so huge to set the foundation up. Not gonna necessarily win you the draft, I mean, win you the league,
Hmm.
right? But
Hmm.
sometimes it can definitely set you up to lose the league, right? So,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
need to make
I
sure.
think that's actually very true. Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta make sure you don't automatically eliminate yourself from having
Hmm.
just a
Hmm.
terrible start. But with that said, let's go team by team. I think we're gonna try to do this really quickly.
Yep.
I think let's start with Diaz's team. I actually
Let's go. So the power
hold
rankings
up.
haven't been released,
Yeah.
but let's just go from top to bottom, and
Okay.
people can know it, but like, we haven't released it yet, so
Yeah.
they can kind of infer from this. But yeah,
That's a great
which fits
idea.
in well because, yeah, I do like starting with Sandy Pines, a team that I think the power rankers think pretty strongly that they're going to be one of the best teams, right?
Yeah.
So we can talk about what makes them so good, like, ask Diaz about where he might feel a little bit more like worried about his own team about, and then we can start with Diaz. Diaz, you want to like kind of give us a little bit of a lay of the land of how you feel like your team turned out, like where you might have a little bit of regrets or what you really liked, like, just kind of your thoughts about your own draft.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, we had two keepers who were running backs who we feel
Mm-hmm.
comfortable starting every week. So we took the gas off running back, the pedal off running back. We had two wide receivers who we think are excellent players, but this preseason they both had questions about their availability, and
Mm-hmm.
so that further influenced us to say, okay, we want to make sure that we have depth at receiver. Um, and yeah, that tier, whatever you call it, maybe the fifth tier, that included Christian Watson and Christian Kirk. I felt like there might be some opportunity there, or some guys with some upside. So I wanted to take a swing at a couple of those guys. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I would say my regret is definitely at tight end. I have not spoken to Hua since the draft. I'm still mad about Mark Andrews.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that
He
would have
he
been,
fucked up your simulations, right? You weren't expecting him to really. I mean,
yeah, because he doesn't
specifically,
need a
yeah,
tight end.
yeah, yes. I mean, yeah, it might not have been like specifically what kind of like sunk you, but it definitely was a little bit of wrench in the gears for you, because like, yeah, you don't expect a guy with Kincaid to spend over 10 on another tight end, really, right? But he
Yeah.
went out and got one of the bigger names. So
For value too. Even on your
yeah, yeah.
sheet, right? You said I think you had like 30 something dollars and he got him for
Yeah,
around 20. So the
Mhm.
value town was there.
Yeah, so I think that our tight ends will be fine. We didn't prioritize the position because I think that the guys around 9, 10, 11 ranked are
Yeah.
fine.
Mhm.
And hopefully we find some consistency there.
Yeah.
And yeah, and we ended up with Tua, and we got that Dolphin stack. So,
Yep.
I think that there's an opportunity for regression in Miami where they had a ton of rushing touchdowns last year. Obviously, as Wankyu,
Yep.
and if just a few of those turn into passing touchdowns, that could be a big boon for our team.
Mhm.
Yeah, go for it, Dustin.
Yeah. So this isn't even an offensive coordinator change, but I think Tua and the Dolphins are a little bit, I can go either way on them, right? So on the one hand, yeah, they did have a lot of rushing touchdowns, and it doesn't seem like that's really sustainable. And Waddle and Tyreek Hill are, very good wide receivers that you expect to score a lot of touchdowns too. On the other hand, they did tail off pretty hard in the second half last year. Um, and a lot of their production did come from that Broncos game, and I think one other game where they put up a lot of points, right? So there's a lot of continuity, which is always good. Usually a pretty good sign that things will stay pretty flat or even chance to improve. But I do think some people are out on some people have a sour taste in how kind of disappointing their second half might have been. They did go really run heavy second half, and you might think it's just kind of a trend, but they also drafted another running back that's pretty talented. And all indications are that they McDaniels has said this is gonna be a team that just runs overpowers team with the run. And I'm obviously you have Tyreek and Waddle, and that's it's all coach speak at that point, right? He's gonna say every part of their team is great. So I definitely see both sides of it. I think Tua is great value at 22, even on the downside case of what I'm saying. But I also see how someone could be oh, this is insane. The Dolphins were so high powered of an offense, but some people might remember the second half Dolphins a little bit more and think slightly different along that scale. And I think every team has a bunch of these 2 or 3 guys on one team that do have a lot of swing in either direction. But I mean overall, yeah, I think this is the strongest team in the league overall. I don't think it's an unbeatable team yet, but I gotta love everything they did to put themselves in position, except for maybe tight end. But like you said, I think tight end is really flat this year. There's a lot of pretty decent guys compared to in the past where it's 1 or 2 really strong guys and then absolute trash. So structure wise, I think this is really good. A lot of a good value, and their keepers were also very very strong. So this is definitely my on paper favorite to win the league or be one of the strongest contenders.
Yeah, I think just quickly on the Dolphins on real life football,
Mhm.
they were embarrassing in the playoffs. I think that also left them.
Yeah,
They
that's what
looked
I'm
like
saying.
they didn't even want to play in the cold. But anyways,
Right. Yep.
in
They're
terms
a,
of
they're a soft team,
yeah, they
maybe,
were
right?
that was embarrassing. I just remember
Yeah.
so bad.
Yeah.
Anyways, the fantasy implications here, right? So
Yeah.
just again, this roster is stacked, right? There's
Mhm.
just a lot of superstars and superstar potential on this roster on the
Mhm.
starting lineup. The bench I think is really great. You got Christian Kirk on the bench right now. I mean, you can switch it to be Watson, but either way, you have a lot of depth. You got a lot of running backs. The real key questions. There's a couple. I think this is a team to me that's going to start the season really strong. I think it's going to be
Mhm.
one of those that go off to a 4-1 start, and it's going to look really good. But it is about
Mhm.
how this team is going to change and mold into its future self in the rest of the
Mhm.
season. It's going to be very important. And then the other thing, of course, the way this roster is trying to win its games, it's through the wide receivers, it's through the
Yep.
running backs, the
Mhm.
QBs. Is Tua good enough? Is Jaden Daniels
All right.
going to survive? I think
Mhm.
he's good. I think he's going to be really, really good. But the way he runs the ball, he's going to get demolished.
Daniels, you're talking about, right?
Huh?
Oh, dude, Daniels, you're talking about,
Yeah, Jaden
dude.
Daniels.
I just want to say, anyone that hasn't seen the most
Holy.
brutal hits he takes,
Yeah.
it's literally cartoonish ragdoll stuff. He'll
Yeah.
get hit and tumble comically over his head and 3 times over it. he gets blindsided hard. But I do love his skill set.
Oh, he's good.
I think
He's
he's
amazing.
like
Yeah.
a really good passer, really good runner. Like
Really good
other
runner.
than like kind of getting blindsided, like
Gets the
he's
ball.
better than he's better than his attributes. But I will say, like some of his hits, you're like, did his shoes and socks fall off? Because like he's completely not expecting it, and he does have a pretty slight frame. So like that's really the only. I agree with you. Like that's maybe one of the things you can be a little bit more questioning on.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have him like pretty safely in like the same region, but he's a guy that could be top 5 easily, or he's a guy that could get hurt, or even struggle because like the physicality is a little bit too strong right away, and like struggle a lot more than we think, right? So that's definitely pretty swingy spot on his roster too, compared to like the wide receivers and running backs, which I think are going to be really good strength. Yeah.
Yeah. Very RG3 like, and he's even.
But
hilarious.
RG3 was a little bit bulkier, right?
Yeah. Even
this guy's even a little bit slimmer. It reminds me of Deshaun Watson, honestly. Deshaun Watson, early in his career, not that he ran as much as I think Daniels will, but he also took some hits where it completely like did not look like he was like braced for it, and he did extend the play a lot, right? So in that sense, like Watson has like not a huge frame either, but he stayed pretty durable, right? Relatively for how many? I mean, yeah, when he was in Houston, I think like we were like, oh my god, how did he take that hit and like still like play, and like it was a very kind of exciting in both ways to watch experience. So I think it could be kind of like that, but yeah, it's definitely so like people should go watch it. You will actually laugh at some of the hits he takes.
I think the plan could have been JJ McCarthy in the second half of the year, but
right now, I mean,
now it's a little bit more in flux. So that's really the only question for me. If I were to nitpick, otherwise this is stacked.
Wankyu, to you, strongest team on paper, or no? You got someone else, right?
No, this one is the second strongest. I think.
Okay.
I think this team is, like I said, is going to start the season really strong. They're going to be first half for sure, but then the question to me is how is it going to evolve as the season progresses? What's going to happen, especially at the QB position, and maybe it is a little bit tied to the Dolphins stack that exists here, right? That Tyreek's going to go crazy in the first half of the season. Just watch, he's going to go ballistic.
I mean, that whole team, like, right, is the cold weather thing a real thing? I kind of think it is a little bit, right? I don't think it's nothing, right? So, yeah, I could see the Sandy Pines and the Dolphins kind of getting off to a super hot start again, and then the weather gets a little bit cold, and like they tighten up a little bit, right? That speed doesn't play out, quite as dominantly, right? And then that could be the difference between like going from the favorite to like one of the teams in the top 2 or 3. But yeah, I mean, either way, I think this team is well built enough to be definitely in that mix, regardless of even like the low end outcomes that we're maybe thinking of, right? So definitely a strong team. I like that how they built it.
Yep. Let's move on. I hope you guys don't have too many plans. I don't know when.
Yeah. I mean, I'm good to go, but yeah, I am worried for like the listener as much too. Yeah, I mean, we didn't even get to our first team until like 45 minutes.
Yeah, people can listen as like a podcast, but for us here live,
I suggest probably 1.25, 1.2.
Yeah.
Pretty easily doable. Like I don't think we talk too fast. So
agree.
Yeah, if you're at this point in the VOD, you could probably go to 1.2. This is probably going to go on a little bit long. Okay.
We're going to LIC.
Yes.
Diaz, let's start with you again. What your thoughts on LIC is?
They're the only team that used the franchise tag this season, and when you're in that position, you're automatically ahead of the pack because you have one extra player coming into the draft, and that player is very likely top 5 at his position. In this case, it's CeeDee Lamb, who last year was top 1 at his position. And yeah, I mean, their receiving core is stacked. They came in with Lamb, Nico Collins, Justin Jefferson, Chris Olave, who should be starting for them every single week as long as they're healthy.
They actually did very little work at wide receiver in the draft, but yeah, it's stacked to like just start. So go on.
I like the quarterback combination here. I think Stafford was is pretty generally undervalued in the draft. He's consistent, and he's got a great scheme and great weapons. and Kirk Cousins has upside that we discussed earlier. That the Ramondre Stevenson was puzzling to me. I was very surprised with the amount that was spent on Ramondre. When that might be the worst offense in football, and whether he has full control of it or is seeds
Just gonna
passing
check.
downward.
What did you have Ramondre for in the
Probably like 11, 12.
18? 18?
Yeah. And he went for 27.
16.
So
yeah, it was 16.
Oh, 16. Yeah,
Wow.
sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So Warren has won 3 championships. He was in the playoffs last year. I wasn't. So there's a lot of things he knows that I don't. But that was one move that definitely stood out to me.
Interesting. Did you want to go, Dustin? I don't really care.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have basically the same thoughts. I think everyone pretty much agrees. The combination of Cousins and Stafford, they're not young, but usually those are pretty good guys for our format in terms of volume, in terms of passing efficiency. I think they're like just strong plays for our league always. And then Stroud is definitely one of the young rising stars with crazy number of weapons, right? So like quarterbacks very strong, wide receivers, enough said. But yeah, running back, I think it wasn't the best combination. I would have tried to come away with. In some ways, they're kind of like Sandy Pines, but Sandy Pines, I have the questions at quarterback maybe, and this team I have the questions at running back maybe. While I think their quarterbacks are a lot safer or more well rounded. But yeah, I mean, this is I think definitely was in my top 2 if I had to rank, which I didn't. But CD Lamb to start as a tag is a great starting spot. His keepers were probably the best or second best. I mean, yeah, I think Sandy Pines and LIT probably had the best keepers coming in, although a lot of opinion and it's hard to tell. But yeah, running back wise, I don't love Robinson at 16 either. Yeah, I similarly didn't find Stevenson to be worth 27. Like what's the upside really? I guess they could be a lot better. It's always possible, but it just seemed pretty underwhelming running back wise. I think he might have been better off just kind of pooling all his running back money into one hero and then kind of just taking cheap, good value shots lower in the running back pecking order, and then you would at least have one stud running back in theory, and then the other 1 or 2 you go to work through trades or waivers, right? That's a lot more doable than kind of I don't see any of these guys necessarily being a running back 1. I think Walker has a chance, but I wouldn't project him out to be such. Kyron is gonna save him there, but otherwise I thought it was a little bit shakier than it could have been there.
You don't think Kyron?
But yeah, I mean,
Kyron's not a stud.
No, I think Kyron will be low end. I do think I'm a big quorum believer, so he has quorum, so maybe it doesn't matter, but maybe they split. But other than Kyron, I don't think Walker was huge value at 36. Although I don't hate it either. But the Ramondre and Robinson, I just feel like the combined upside of those two for that money kind of wasn't the best place to spend it. But that's personal opinion, and the rest of the team is so solid that it is mostly nitpicking at that point. Yeah. Definitely for me, yeah, one of the 2 strongest teams.
Go ahead, Diaz.
I think that Warren had a strategy going in, which was to get one of the big quarterbacks. And when those guys went for more than he was willing to spend, he had a chunk of money that he had to distribute.
Very possible, yeah. I wonder if he'll, answer yes or no. But yeah, it does kind of smell like that because, yeah, I did actually think he was just going to get one of those quarterbacks. It definitely wasn't his biggest need, but I thought he might just have enough money to kind of go there. And I did. The quarterbacks did kind of go for a little bit more, the top 3 ones, a little bit more than I thought they would. So he might have gotten squeezed out there and then kind of had to stick the money somewhere. And that's kind of where it ended up, right? So I think that's a pretty good hypothesis. But yeah, I mean, it's still a really good team. So
yeah, it's kind of crazy. You guys are talking about this, but for me, when I mentioned my draft strategy, for me, the quarterback went cheaper than I expected. So
Yeah, I mean, me too, a little bit.
I had to change my strategy. But anyways,
Yeah,
because I thought people
me
were
too,
gonna
a
go
little
crazy,
bit.
right? I
Yeah,
thought everyone was gonna go for the elite
all right.
QBs. So,
Yeah,
anyways, with that said, back to Warren's team. It's again one of these rosters stacked, right? We talked
yeah,
about it. Keepers
yeah.
stacked. CeeDee Lamb
Mm,
stacked. You got pretty good depth. He built depth in the running back position. It's again, I think,
yeah.
going back to the QB. So
Mm,
this is the second team in a row where the strategy here is, build depth, have
yeah,
these wide receivers go 4 or 5 wide, and then have your running
yeah.
backs with a little
Like
bit
I
of
said, I think
question
yeah,
marks
I think
in the
it's
QB.
yeah
Yeah,
very similar, except yeah, switching from like I think they the Stroud is probably safer than Daniels, and then I think running back wise, I think Sandy Pines is a little bit I think safer at running back for sure.
yeah,
So
yeah,
they are
exactly.
similar in that like their wide receivers are stacked. They have a lot of value through their keepers. So like they were starting from really good positions, and yeah, I think those two teams are definitely going to be contenders for sure. How far they go, I think it'll really depend on some of the things you said about like how do they navigate that second half of the season. Like, what can they improve enough in the positions that they'll be a little bit deficient in? Like, will they peak at the right time? Those are, I think, pretty fair questions. But in terms of on paper, like how much firepower each team has, I think they're, you know, pretty clearly in the top three, if not, top 3 or 4, at worst. So,
Yeah, for me, this is another team in the top tier of teams for
mm-hmm,
me in the league. Right, there's like 3 or 4 teams that I think are the top
mm-hmm,
tier. But I think for me, the biggest question. I love CJ Stroud. I think he's a
mm-hmm,
wonderful QB, real life QB. He's great. But
mm-hmm,
for fantasy, is he going to be good enough? Is he a stud
sure,
QB? Is he going to be a top 5, top 3? Right? If he is top 3, this roster is really, really
yeah,
good. You can't. I don't think you
yeah,
can beat it. But yeah, that's the question. Is he more on the top 10, that
mm-hmm,
area? And then now are you
sure,
a little bit weaker in the QBs versus the other QBs in the
yeah.
league where he's only
Even
putting
even the
20, right, instead of the 30 or
even yeah,
40?
like even the best quarterbacks like of all time, like they have to like adjust to like how teams are gonna like treat them differently now, right? Like I think
Yeah,
a
yeah,
lot of
exactly.
quarterbacks, some of them, a lot of them even have their best year like in their like statistically wise or like
Yep.
close to it, and then like even if they're better real life quarterbacks, they have like adjustments to how teams are limiting them or like how teams are forcing them into like certain plays. Even Mahomes, like they play cover two shells like all the time on him, so his stats are not really gonna he also doesn't have Tyreek, but like his stats are a lot harder to reach, just because teams are playing him so differently. But he's still effective in real life. But like teams are definitely playing him differently, and like he has adjusted. Stroud is going to have to make some adjustments of his own. I'm foreseeing, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
yeah, it'll be really interesting to see if he takes a step up or has a little faltering. Like those are definitely two things. If he steps up, yeah, I think this is gonna be pretty hard to beat.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm getting at. It's a question mark.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's going to
Mm.
go definitively one way, but
Yeah.
it's more of a question mark than I think people are assuming
Uh-huh.
for CJ, right? A lot of people are just penciling him in
Yeah.
as,
Hmm.
but we don't know. It could go in a direction that you might not like
Yeah.
sometimes,
We'll see.
especially with
We'll
these young
see.
guys. We'll see. Let's move on to Virginia.
Yes.
Virginia. Oh, okay.
Who was the lowest on him?
The lowest was Diaz.
Probably me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for
Okay.
it. Go for
So
it.
tell us the concerns, and we'll see if you had a pretty good point that maybe we weren't thinking of.
I mean, to me, the first thing is the shine is off Justin Herbert.
Mm-hmm.
The offense in general with the new coaching is going to be
Mm-hmm.
run focused. We all expect. His wide receiver core may be the worst in the NFL. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
could have said that about the Texans last year. So for what it's worth, but these
That's actually
guys
funny. Yeah.
inspire a ton of confidence. And I mean, it's kind of what you guys were just talking about. Like since he exploded onto the scene, he hasn't really been able to match
Yeah,
what he first brought to the table.
exactly. You're right.
Um,
Yep.
Yeah.
And so, not that he's bad.
No, yeah,
Obviously,
it's
he's a
like that
great
for a
player.
lot of guys, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but if he's not that, top 5 guy, which I question whether he's a top 12 guy,
10, yeah, top
it's
12
like,
maybe. Yeah.
then what is this team really bringing to the table? They have a
Mhm.
lot of good guys, but like, I don't know, it doesn't pop for me in the same way. If that's your, QB1 or QB2.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think,
Yeah.
maybe it's because
Wonky, yeah. What do you love about this team? Because
well, I
you're
will
obviously
say,
higher.
like, staring at Sandy Pines and then staring at LIC and then staring at this
Yeah.
team, there is a little bit of a
And then
drop off. I'm
yeah, and
just
then
gonna be honest.
what Diaz said also is kind of, yeah, like he does have a point. Like
Yeah,
I
it's a good
am
point.
like, yeah.
But
Tell me, yeah, tell me what you like though. Like, let's
he,
give him a little bit of positive joy. He just sat through probably like an hour plus of like all these other teams, and he's waiting for some good news. Come on, Wonky, give him some sugar.
well, for me, this team is definitely one of the top tier teams for sure. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's in the top half of the league for sure. The main draw for me, the running backs,
Yeah, where
right?
is he strongest?
Achan, I think. So you can say whatever about him, and he's one of the most legendary by efficiency metric running
Yeah.
backs ever in the entire history of the league or whatever. But he's gonna do well, and backing him up is Mostert, one of my favorite guys.
Yep.
Right? So I think you have the entire Dolphins backfield. Like I said, they're gonna go crazy. You could probably start both, Wah. and then
I think so. I think
and,
so.
and then like Barkley, right? I think Barkley. Just watching him on the Giants, he just didn't have a fair shot. The O line is the best he's probably played behind in his whole career,
Yeah,
and so
by
this
far.
is gonna be, I think, probably like a top 3 season. In my opinion, I think he's gonna be. Yeah, this is gonna be an insane year for Barkley. So you start with the running backs. We talked about the QBs a little bit. Herbert, yeah, he's not gonna be that good, but he's gonna be efficient. I think that's what Giro always does in that scheme. And so, and if Herbert might be able to show his legs a little bit, I know he has a
Yep.
foot issue, but
Mhm.
if he's able to run and get some rushing touchdowns,
Yeah.
that's going to help his
Yeah.
bottom line. And then Jordan Love, he's got a lot of weapons. So I think based off of that, that's where I'm giving the ranking. I do have question marks
Yep.
around the wide receivers. I've already let
Yeah, I
people
was gonna
know.
say, wow, what do you think about those?
Yeah, the Harrison. I think he's a little bit overrated, right? And then I do
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Drake London, and I do think this was a great price for him. But there
Mhm.
is a question mark. We again are
Yeah,
extrapolating
yeah.
and hyping, right?
I'm not saying that I like what I brought up concern wise is
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
but it's not a static situation from last year where a guy's just carrying over success. A lot of people are kind of guessing. Yeah,
We're
like
guessing.
Kirk.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kirk's wide receiver one has always been good, but he also played with Justin Jefferson, and then like back in Washington, he was a young guy. Like it's a complete. I think people are assuming a little bit too strongly. Like, oh yeah, this plus this equals this, and kind of leaving out some factors like age or changing schemes or changing wide receiver one. Like these all kind of like factor in and make it slightly more volatile. Like it could go either direction. I completely agree. It could be Drake London top 5 wide receiver, and it wouldn't surprise me. But he could also kind of have like a little bit better of a year than last year, and I would be like, I mean, yeah, okay, like Kirk Cousins is 35, and like Drake London isn't Justin Jefferson by anyone's eye test, right? So like weird to expect him to just like be kind of like that kind of jump, right? So
Yeah. I don't know.
yeah,
Yeah, it feels off to me. Yeah, that
right.
scheme, right? I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's isn't it the Rams that
It is.
style, right?
It is.
So
So
you need you need
that's
to
a
find
good
the
thing in
Cooper
his favor
Cup,
for
right?
sure.
I'm not sure if
Yeah.
London's a Cooper Cup in that offense. So
Right.
I don't
He's
know.
not that style. Yeah.
Right? Who's the other guy that man? Oh yeah, like Amon Ra, right? Like someone like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like yeah,
Yeah.
that's who. If there was someone like that, I could draw the parallel a little bit more. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if I see that with London. I think I
Mm-hmm.
see him more as like a Robert Woods or someone like that, who's
I agree.
great, wonderful. But
Right.
is he
That
gonna be
offense
top
might
10? I don't
need,
know.
yeah, that offense might need a kind of Cup style or an Amon Ra style receiver that's very reliable that you can kind of pepper with targets and like they'll win often, right? And like create. You just have to kind of like place the ball for them in the right place and like they can go do it, right? I don't think Drake London is necessarily that kind of guy that can do it all
Just,
over the
just
field,
do it with
middle.
Bijan. Just throw it to Bijan.
Oh, it could be.
It could be. I mean,
Yeah, it
yeah,
could be.
you're
It
right.
could
No,
be.
Bijan dump offs could go crazy. So I think there's a lot of ways for it to play out. I do
Yeah.
just think it's like a little bit more shaky. Yeah, I think listening to kind of like what Diaz said about this team, and then like what you like about this team, I'm probably I actually do think Herbert might be better than like what a lot of people think. Like I just think a good quarterback can sometimes like not drop off as much, even if they are going to run it a ton, and like everybody knows about like what the offense shift is going to look like, right? So I'm actually less worried about that. I just the wide receivers after even like London and Harrison, like he doesn't have like a lot that I feel really safe in. Like what DeAndre Hopkins is wide receiver 3. I guess he would start Kincaid at basically wide receiver. But that still means like Hopkins and like even beyond that, like Sutton, I guess, is gonna be getting starts like, you know, pretty often, which I think a lot of the strongest teams I think are avoidant of that, right? So definitely think like he needs to do some work. I think shoring up the back end of his wide receivers, even if like London and Harrison are, really good. I think he still wants to improve there. And I actually think he's probably okay everywhere else. It's just definitely more holes, I think, like on paper to start than the first 2 teams we mentioned.
Yeah, actually, I would have liked this team more if his bench was filled with more wide receiver options.
Right,
But
right. Like
now that I'm
there are
staring at
better
it,
guys. There
yeah,
are better guys out there for I think 6 and 9 or like whatever. He spent like total on his like bench. Better guys out there that I would have liked to see him roster than those guys because he really is too deep at wide receiver in terms of proving guys, right? And then after that, it's Hopkins who some people will probably think he can be pretty good, and Sun who probably also has like a similar role, but definitely like less shiny than a lot of other teams, wide receiver 3s and 4s. So I would have liked to see depth behind that or with that, like where you're like, okay, this guy I could see the season going really well and popping into the top 20, top 25 at wide receiver. I just don't see really guys like that. So
it's gonna come down to how Hua can manage
yeah.
in season.
Mm-hmm.
Diaz mentioned how he had trouble changing these running backs into wide receivers.
Yeah.
Will Hua face the same issues? We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And if he is
won't.
able to,
Yeah. Luckily, yeah.
He's
Luckily,
he's
this
the
is
best
this is the
at
best
that.
trader in the league. So
so if
if
he's able to
anyone
figure
if
that
anyone
out,
can, yeah.
yeah,
If anyone can do it, it's Hua. So like that's why I still believe in this team to be
yeah,
above average team, but like like it's gonna take some really like he's gonna have to comb it for like guys that he can like snap up from basically every team because like he needs some more interesting or better depth, I think. So
yeah. It's like
yeah.
the same with the Kincaid and Mark Andrews. We didn't talk about it here, but we talked about it earlier. But he is going to be running the 2 tight end set.
Mm-hmm.
He is going to have what looks like 2 really good tight ends, and so can he maybe change that to something else
Mm-hmm.
later down the season
Yeah,
into a
good
wide
trader.
receiver? Who knows,
Good
right?
trader. Like you gotta think it's possible.
Yeah.
Like
So
with somebody that's not as aggressive in the trade market, it's tough. It's not as easy as it seems. Just go turn a tight end. It's like everybody is kind of like either bought into like, oh yeah, like my tight end is shitty and I'm gonna live with it, so like don't bother me. Or people have like tight ends that are like they think close to or as good as like some of the options you're offering. So it's definitely not easy, but yeah, I mean, this team actually kind of fits his style well. Like he'll have to make trades to kind of round it out like the way that I think a real contender will be. But he's definitely the owner to do it. So
yeah, he'll
should
get
be
top dollar.
fun to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, should be fun.
For these talents. All right, let's move on to Mars.
This is your number 1 team, right? So
This is my
how
number
about
one
you?
team, guys.
Yeah, you tell us why this is the number 1 team, and then me or Diaz will tell you what we think could go wrong.
So it starts with the QB, and I
Mm-hmm.
think maybe that's the difference for this team versus what the other teams that we've seen so far. I think this is the best QB core. Your QB1 is Josh Allen. That's you don't need to say anything more than that. And then you have Anthony Richardson, who is very polarizing. People have
Mm-hmm.
very wide and varying opinions of this guy. I think he could be a QB, like top 5 QB, fantasy wide,
Mm-hmm.
right? Fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of real life, that's different. But he's gonna rush. He's one of the most
Mm-hmm.
athletic QBs ever, and he's now going to have a chance, an opportunity to play a full season. Will he finish the season? I don't know, but the
Mm-hmm.
guy has a chance, and so let's just plug in the numbers for him there. And when I do that, I think he's going to be, again, a top 5 fantasy QB, which then gives him, I think, the strongest QB core of the league. And that, to me, gives him the edge in terms of the whole season. Behind that, he's
Mm-hmm.
got some really nice running backs, right? Jonathan Taylor. If I'm thinking the Colts are going to do well, then Taylor obviously is going to eat in the red zone there. And then Pacheco, who a lot of people have been saying a lot of good things about with Clyde Edwards-Helaire no longer really playing a factor. And then they just picked up P. Ryan. I think Pacheco's going to be slated for another big year for the Chiefs in that really strong offense. And then no real weakness in the wide receivers either. I think maybe people can gripe a little bit about the age. I think these guys are not young players like we've just seen in all the other rosters, but I think Cooper can still deliver. That guy helped me last year. Mike Evans can still deliver, even though he's 31. He's going to still turn in like a top 20, top 30 type of season. And then the question mark is with Diggs and Shakir, right? So are these guys going to step up in new situations where they have to either be like a third or second option, or they have to fill in the shoes of, the Diggs leaving? I didn't even mention James Cook. He's going to be really good as well in that Buffalo offense. So there's a couple of team stacks here as well, the Colts and the Bills. But if these
Yep.
teams play well, I think this team is going to be very strong throughout the whole season.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll give my concerns. I actually do think they're a pretty strong team. Just probably don't agree with like your number one ranking of them. Um, yeah. So yeah, Anthony Richardson is probably the big one, right? Like you firmly believe he's like top 5 material. I definitely don't think it's impossible. Very small sample size last year, so it's kind of really hard to really extrapolate too much from that. But you're right that like his play profile, where he rushes a lot, he's big, fast, strong, like all that, like really promising, right? Like he can run for chunks of 40, 60, and kind of like bull in for touchdowns too, right? Like we don't really have that many QBs that can do both, right? But I think he really does kind of play recklessly. He does lead with his shoulder a lot, and he's had shoulder problems before. It knocked him out for the year. And is he a smart, cerebral enough player to kind of be like, oh, I got to protect my shoulder. I got to, know when to get down. Like, I think there are question marks. I don't know if he's that smart of a player where he can like kind of, hold like bring that back in and play like to an optimal, safer style, right? And also wide receivers, I do think he has like 3 pretty safe ones, but Odunze, I don't know when he's gonna, contribute necessarily, and Shakir, I think has upside, but like it's definitely shakier on the back end of his wide receivers than some of these other teams. So I do think he's a strong team. I just don't know if he's a top team.
Well, if Richardson goes down, and next man up, you just drop Chandler Jones in there. It's
That's
like
actually a really good point. Here's a fact: $118 allocated to the QB position, the highest ever for an HFFL team. 118 combined, 5 roster spots, not full roster spots, but 5 spots on the roster. The investment is big, so you're right. Maybe if Richardson just doesn't go down for the year and like it's like 1 or 2 week injuries, like he could definitely survive if his Daniel Jones pops, or Fields takes the job over, or maybe even Drake May is like a thing by like second half. So he does have a lot of like protection and outs in that direction. But I do think like the standard of the top teams is a little bit short, just because I don't know what we're getting out of like Odunze or Shakir yet, and he does have a lot of money tied up in quarterbacks, which I think kind of limits him from like finding breakouts at running back or wide receiver naturally. Because I mean, he's just spending spots on QBs that other teams aren't, right? So I mean, I definitely do think this is a good team. I do question like top one or two. It's a little bit shakier for me. But yeah, Diaz, you could add any further points you have.
Yeah, it's funny. We look at two teams with managers who love to trade, Wah and John, and they're not at all a match for each other because they both need wide receiver depth.
It's true, yeah. They both have the same, kind of problem at wide receiver where like they do have like some solid guys, but like the last two or one spots, especially during buys, is going to be a lot shakier. And I don't know if like that strong depth is out there on waivers, so it's definitely gonna have to be trades. But yeah, continue.
My concern is absolutely with the wide receivers here. Stephon Diggs, he couldn't get anything going in the second half of last year, and it's legit to question whether he's washed. And if he can't keep up, there's other options in Houston that are going to keep him off the field.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's probably the biggest difference. Like he's not going to be force fed if he's a step behind. The other options.
Yeah, and Amari, I think he had a lot of good production last year with Joe Flacco, and if you're the Amari manager, you have to hope that he's going to have production with Jameis Williams this year or Jameis Winston, because
he will.
I watched a lot of. I unfortunately had to watch a lot of Deshaun Watson, and I think he's the worst quarterback in the NFL. Like
he's washed. He's like actually washed.
He's
it's not injury. He's just actually bad now.
He
like,
sucks.
He didn't work on his game at all while he was like out of football, and he doesn't care at this point.
He doesn't want to play. Yeah.
Yeah, he just doesn't want to play, and he's just bad. He's just bad, I think. But
Winston though. I'm already sliding in Winston. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, that could be pretty good for Amari Cooper. So I'm I'm actually not hating that anymore.
Yeah, Marquise Brown on the IR. I think he overspent. John did, but I think Hollywood has a chance. Obviously, it's a great offense, and nobody is solidified there yet. So if he can come back from his injury and carve out a spot, he might get a lot of good points out of the Kansas City offense.
Yeah, I think sometimes we overcomplicate it, but just get players from good offenses, which this team has done. Chiefs, Houston, Buffalo, Colts, right? I think that's going to be fine. And
what about Ramondre Stevenson, Brian Robinson, and Kenneth Walker? Would you say that's like pretty similar? I feel like that's like the same thing, right?
Sorry,
Warren. I had to bring it back to LIC for a second there. But yeah, you're right.
I think
definitely got a lot of that.
The numbers are going to be
stacked up
there.
all over the place.
Yeah,
stacked up all over the place on good offenses that are going to have to put up some pretty big points. So
no overcomplication. I mean, we forget. Don't worry about Drake May. Don't worry about the Patriots, whatever. But maybe that's just the development thing. And just one final thing. I am biased because Odunze, I think he's going to be great immediately. I really do. I don't even think we again pencil him in as the third option. I don't think so. I think he's going to be legit immediately. So he's going to crack the roster here, and Shakir I think is going to step up. So that's why probably I think this team is going to be number one.
That's valid. I mean, I could see both of those things happening. Like Odunze is a very, very good wide receiver. Like he's so overall well-rounded. Like he is good at like everything a wide receiver has to be good at. He's not like a crazy physical specimen, but he is like he just does everything right. And I was like, oh wow, this guy I really wish ended up on, a team where he could kind of be a one or two right away, right? Like I think he might be the like first or second best wide receiver pretty early on, but I think they might just kind of slowly ease him in. But yeah, I mean that could still be a second half breakout or something that lets this team peak at the right time, right? So
exactly.
Yeah, I think your point is pretty good there.
Yeah, I think some of those guys are going to rise, and you slot them in later, they're gonna contribute. All right, let's move.
Justin Fields second half.
They could be. Sorry.
They could be. He's gonna get another 5-year deal.
Oh, we laugh, but Justin Fields likely is gonna have like a 5-game stretch where he goes into
probably. He's one of those bad quarterbacks that can still put up like crazy fantasy points type of guys.
Yeah, so we're not gonna be laughing then. All right, let's go to Madison. So to me, this is where it starts. To me, the next tier, but I think probably for you guys, it probably started with Mars, right? To start the next
Uh-huh.
tier of teams. Where did I put Madison?
You had
Ooh,
Madison pretty low,
actually, just
so
kidding. I have Madison really low.
yeah. Tell me what the concerns you see are here.
So I think it's again. Oh man, maybe I'm being such a hater today, but with Jalen Hurts, I do have some concerns, and I thought Mars did a
Mm-hmm.
smart move trading away Hurts this year.
Mm.
It, there is a little bit of concern for me in terms of no longer having Kelsey. That's going to matter.
Mm-hmm.
Not only the
Yep.
what do you call it? The
Not only just tush push. It's not
tush
just the
push, yeah,
tush push.
not just the tush push, but the guy also set all the protections.
Yep.
There
Yep.
was this one I can't remember this clip, but basically Hertz made some change to the play or protection, and Kelsey just waved it off. He's like, "What the
Yep.
what the hell are you talking about? That's the
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah.
That's just wrong." And he just waved it off and stuck with the right play, and they made it work. So I have some question marks with Hertz in terms of an actual QB, right? Like, is he going to still perform the way he did in the past seasons without someone like Kelsey actually leading that protection and offense, right?
Yep.
So that's my biggest thing. If
Mm-hmm.
you expect Hurts to be a top 5 QB,
Yep.
then yeah, I could see why this team is going to be really good. The other one is Laporta, right? I think Laporta tight end 1 last year. He was amazing down the stretch, but is he going to return that again? I don't know. I'm a little doubtful again. I sound like a hater. That's why I'm laughing here. But I'm not so certain he's going to be a tight end 1. Maybe he's even on the later half of the top 10 tight ends, right? Like
I think it's
there's a
possible.
lot
I
of
think it's
variance there.
possible. Mm-hmm.
So because of all that, I mean, there's a lot of talented players. Don't get me wrong, but one of the things I mentioned in the write up, it's a lack of a superstar. Now, if you think Hurts is the superstar, then yes. But to me, he no longer is. So that's where I'm discounting this team. I'm not sure if they're going to have that, that like X factor when you play against them. So yeah, I'd like to hear you guys' thoughts.
And so,
yeah.
the Hurts downgrade brings AJ Brown down as well.
Yes, yep.
Mm.
To me,
Yeah,
I'm
I mean, if
projecting.
you're down on the Eagles' passing offense, then
Yep.
yeah, this team is gonna struggle. I mean, I think T. Higgins is a good player in general. I think he's had some bad injury, bad luck, some bad timing with his quarterback getting injured that he hasn't really put it together in a while. But regardless of the Jamar holdout or not, I think T. Higgins is poised to put up some numbers this year. And yeah, I mean, I think Kyler's great. Like he should be fully recovered from his surgery. He's got a great new weapon. So yeah, whether you think he's the best rookie receiver or merely the second or third best, like I think it's going to be, he has a lot of good opportunity there. Yeah, I'm interested to see if Gus Edwards can put together another good season behind a strong offensive line and a team that may lean on him. So yeah, I mean, I think that with the median projection for Philly, this team looks strong. If you're way down on them, then certainly that's going to be a problem.
Yeah. Would you definitely say a tier kind of below, the top like second tier team for you, Diaz, or you think
I don't think.
they're
I
still
mean,
up there?
it's I don't know. I believe in Jalen Hurts. I think he's going to still be a top 3 guy. So
Mm-hmm.
with those two quarterbacks, I think both of them have top 5 upside.
Yep.
I would keep this in that tier.
Okay. So yeah, so I was talking to Wankyu earlier, and I was saying like, so I do pretty certainly have a top 2 teams, and I don't think it's like a insurmountable difference between the top 2 teams and the rest of the league. But I literally thought like 3 to 10, any order. I was like, you know what? I kind of see it, right? And this is like, with Mars, it's kind of the Indianapolis like stack, and is that gonna like, is Richardson reliable, and is he gonna really kind of emerge as like a real fantasy stud? For this team, it is kind of Kelsey changing, but a lot of people are kind of projecting, changing offensive coordinator to also kind of cancel out the losses they might have from less tush push for Hurts, right? Like I certainly think most fantasy experts are kind of projecting this new offensive coordinator should be more fantasy friendly, better for their passing attack, and
Kellen Moore.
like I said, like I said, like a lot of like offensive coordinator changes are the reason that teams are or that experts or whatever are like elevating players. Like they're kind of guessing like, okay, like I think I know what this offensive coordinator is going to do for this offense, and I don't think people actually know to as strong of a degree as like maybe they kind of play it off as, and that's why this team I could see being up there for sure. Like it really hinges on Hurts and AJ Brown, kind of they're stacked together. You really need Hurts to kind of come back passing wise, like his efficiency wise, like he was a lot down last year. Really only survived with like just pushing. If that's gone, if he's kind of the same passer as last year, then I think this team is probably in the bottom, bottom, chunk. But if the offensive coordinator was the issue, if they have more, route variety, better scheme plays, better play calling, if that makes a difference to turn Hurts back into the passer he was before, last year where he kind of regressed, then he has two parts of that offense that should be hitting like the high end of what their projections are. And if you view this team in that lens, I certainly do think they're like in the top 3 or 4, maybe even 2 teams. So I see that a lot with like pretty much every team. Like I think every team has like some pretty good strong points, some holes, and then there's usually 1 or 2 guys that are a little bit more polarizing, and I could see the argument for either direction that like you can argue in. So I'm basically sitting on the fence as hard as I can here. I basically say we'll have to see with Hurts. Like I think I can guess, but my guess is only as good as what it is. It's just a guess, right? So definitely has enough pieces like where if the top end of the outcomes show up for those two, then I think this could definitely be a pretty serious contender.
Yeah, I think we didn't mention him, but Derrick Henry is going to be a stud in Baltimore. I think that's like really been agreed upon by everybody for some reason, but I do think that's going to happen. And then I think the bench is pretty, in my opinion, pretty good. I like Lad McConkey. I like Ricky Pearsall. There's some interesting guys in Dowdle, Irving, Vidal, Minshew. So these guys, this is a good bench, and I think there's going to be a lot of depth. They're ready for the whole, to play a good regular season, and likely, in my opinion, they're gonna be one of those teams about 500 midway, maybe on the cusp of the playoffs, and probably gonna factor into the playoff picture late in the season, but not something that will be in the top tier for me.
Okay, that's fair.
Although I did put them 8th, so I don't know.
I think it's just really flat between 3
and
it's for me. Yeah. So like it's literally like the difference of like if I was looking extra hard when I was scanning the roster at a player that I like, then I might put him a spot or 2 above. It's like that close. I think like we'll see as we go down this list, but like I feel like most of these teams will have a decent argument to be higher or lower than Madison. So yeah, we can probably move on from here.
Yeah, it's just a very safe team, and maybe that's why I was kind of like, it's kind of boring, It's not,
not spicy enough.
Not spicy. That's what I think what it is. All right, let's go to great kills.
Yes.
Did you want to start, Dustin?
Yeah, I'll start first. I think whenever you have the highest paid player and it's a running back, especially Christian McCaffrey, I mean, there's nothing around it. Like if this team's fortunes will, largely go with him, especially with the advantage that he had over every player last year. Like at his best, obviously, he can pretty much drag, a pretty average team like right to the playoffs, right? And if he's hurt or if he's regressing due to age, then there's very little you can do to overcome. I mean, it's doable, but like it's not easy to overcome like a $82 disappointment. So I think first and foremost, it starts there. Otherwise, it's traditionally decently strong at running back in terms of depth. This team usually does have a lot of like running back flyers or guys that could kind of outperform their your value, and I think Ford and Chubb as a combo, or Ty J, or some of these guys, Jalen Wright, like some of these guys could emerge, right? And that gives them the upside, kind of like to peak later in the season if some of those things do pan out. But yeah, I mean, I think beyond McCaffrey, QB is definitely a question mark. I think Geno Smith is actually one of the polarizing guys. I think a lot of fantasy experts and even just owners in general are pretty over him, right? But the offensive coordinator change in Seattle, they got the guy from Washington University, right? He had insane pass volume in college. Like he passed at the highest rate, even though his team was like up all the time. And if he kind of brings a up tempo, more pass heavy offense to Seattle, Geno Smith could actually see a better statistical season than some people think. But he's obviously not super young. He's not the QB of the future. If he's struggling or doing bad, that he could probably get even replaced midseason. So I see where like the huge question marks are, and Russell Wilson, isn't a cover for that. It doesn't cover the case of like, Geno Smith just being bad. So those are probably like the two biggest like hinge points. Like McCaffrey has to kind of do McCaffrey things, and then I think the other thing is like if Geno Smith isn't viable as a starter, like that's just too big of a hole for this team to compete with the rest of the league. But I do like pretty much the rest of what there is on this roster. It's I think it's pretty good, or like passable like everywhere else.
Should I go, Diaz? You got it. Go for it.
Well, I'll drop in a couple nuggets here. I really like what you did with the Cleveland backfield.
Yeah, I think combined,
Individually,
combined, like what is that? Like $11 for one of the better offensive, running lines in the league. A team that kind of runs the ball a lot. Like I just feel like that's like a better use of $11 than a lot of other backfields. Even if like they do split, like it should still kind of be at least net neutral value. So yeah, I do think like we built out like pretty well like down the line with guys like that. Yeah, like you can go on.
No, and I'll pose a question because this is something I thought about a lot before the draft.
Yep.
You've got a guy like Dak Prescott.
Mm-hmm.
He's pretty much immobile. He's got a great, wide receiver one, historically good, very good offense, and he's had, some very good seasons, some less good seasons, but most recently he's had a very good season.
Yes.
And then you look at guys who are behind him who became available, Tua, Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford, where they all have a similar profile. They're not going to run. They have good offenses. They have good receivers, to varying extents. And, I kept asking myself, because I had Dak, as like a $50 player, and I said, why? What separates him from these other guys where I'm this much more confident that he's going to put up the numbers than, the $12 Matthew Stafford? So I wonder what your opinion is on that.
Okay. So I definitely don't think Dak is the $25 better than Tua. Like that, Tua I wasn't expecting to be whatever price he was, but we did think like Dak Prescott was better. Because one, I think Dallas's defense, this is actually another coordinator change. They did change their coordinator, and some people are projecting their defense to be, as good or not. But I think they're missing Bland. They're missing, I think, D lineman. I do think that offense is going to be pretty leaky, and I do think with the running back options that Dallas has, I think they're going to stay pretty pass heavy, right? So in that sense, I felt pretty strongly that Dak, even if he's not exactly what he is last year, I don't see as much fantasy downside as some of the other guys, and I'm sure people will disagree. But Dak, age profile wise, is younger than Stafford and Cousins. I think we too easily forget that 35 is old for a quarterback, and a lot of guys that we thought were not reliant on mobility, not reliant on physical gifts like Rivers or Matt Ryan, they kind of fell off at the same age. And I think every time you're dipping into a 35-year-old quarterback, I think you're rolling the dice a little bit. I can't say for sure like either one of those guys will bust, but I think the odds are a little bit higher like each year. And then for Tua, honestly, like we didn't like if we knew we could get him for like 22, I think we would have just like followed that track. But the one thing that does scare me about Tua is I don't know, a concussion for him would kind of just like scare me a lot more than a lot of other quarterbacks.
True.
Just like it would kind of make me feel like really bad. And our conclusion was like, if you lose a quarterback to injury, and obviously Dak missed like a whole season with a broken ankle, so projecting injuries is always hard. But like, if we lose a quarterback to injury, like I don't know how we're gonna replace it. Like we don't have, anybody even with like upside. We're not planning on like saving money for any guy that we would feel comfortable being our QB1 because like Gino's already like kind of shaky. We kind of that like tipped it a lot in Dak. We just felt he was like health wise a little bit safer, but that is a huge opinion based thing, and I understand why like somebody could have Tua just straight up higher than Dak, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree, but we did have Dak a little bit higher. Obviously for the prices, we probably would have gone Tua, but yeah.
No, well, listen, it wouldn't have happened because the reason Tua was 22 was because you had Dak.
True. We would have probably gone up a little bit, a good amount higher, and then all of a sudden Tua isn't that attractive to me at least, right? So yeah, I mean, I think all valid points on like Cousins and Stafford. If you get both of them, like probably one of them have like over a 50% chance of putting up like whatever Dak is like most of the time, right? But for me, we were trying to avoid downside, and because of Gino, and for us, Dak was, in our opinion, less downside. But yeah, I completely understand if you like disagree and think like Dak has plenty of downsides too, or aren't scared off at all by Stafford or Cousins' age, or Tua's concussion history. Those are all valid points. That was just how our preferences played out.
Yeah, I think it's funny because
Cousins,
he's coming off the Achilles. Stafford already got hurt this preseason.
Yep.
So
like
exactly.
That also
very valid. And then it's funny. Like, shouldn't Warren have gone for Dak? Like, I feel like
we thought he would.
Yeah, we were in the room. He said he didn't want his season to hinge on the Cowboys.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Okay,
that's Dak has like negative aura, so like I understand not getting like pumped to have him like be like one of the main contributors. But yeah, Kirk Cousins is 36. Stafford is 35.
Yeah.
Look up all the quarterbacks in history that played past 35, and you'll probably be pretty shocked at how many fell off then, right? Obviously,
like Brady.
I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not. Brady is like a major outlier, and then everyone else like 35, 36, 37 is like definitely around when they start hitting it, right? So I'm not saying that for sure either one of them drop off. But the odds, we weren't willing to play the odds because this guy had to be our QB1, right? So even if like value-wise Dak is returning worse value, if we think he's safer, we were like, I'd rather not have our season end because Kirk Cousins is completely washed up after an Achilles injury, or Stafford calf injury like lingers and like turns into something that just like knocks him out for games, and we have to start Russell Wilson or like Gardner Minshew for 4 games early in the season. Like I that probably like kills your season too early in the season, right? So that's kind of what shifted us towards that way. But yeah, value wise, I understand why like people aren't like, oh, like that seems like a little bit overpay-ish. But
I think
I
see both sides. I think
yeah,
sometimes
exactly.
you can get by, especially we talked about Winston, but he's a great example. He's a great backup that I think we'll see a lot of play. Flacco also won people championships last year, pretty sure. But anyways, the back to the team and the roster. I think this is, out of all the teams we've seen, maybe the first, maybe the only example of like a stars and scrubs type of roster construction. You're banking on your stars, right? Christian McCaffrey, Dak is among them as well, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. That's who I would say as the top 3. We talked a lot about Dak, but I think Christian McCaffrey for me personally, he was another reason why I shifted, because I thought he would go for higher. I think this is pretty cheap in my opinion. And we can disagree. I think people can talk about that in whatever way they want, but obviously when he's healthy, he's one of the best players in my opinion in fantasy. He does have an injury, so there is that. I think
he's not young.
He's not young.
He's on the age for RB decline. He's coming off some pretty big usage, and there's definitely a world where they like kind of give him less percent of touches, just trying to keep him fresh.
Yeah.
So I see all these downsides, but last year he averaged like 8 fantasy points more than like the RB3, which is like insane. Like
insane.
If everybody, I think, does the exact same numbers they did last year, which is obviously a stupid way to like frame it, but if that happens, this team is the highest scoring team, like straight up. Like Christian McCaffrey is just a ridiculous cheat code. So I understand. But if he dies, like the season is kind of just over, right?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, we were like, all right, like let's try for that experience. Like let's see if we get the good end. It could be bad
already though. That's the problem.
He does. Yeah.
If he didn't, I'd be okay with it. But he already has that calf, so like I'd bump you up higher, because Christian McCaffrey, I believe he's made the playoffs like almost every year he's been healthy, right?
Every year he's healthy.
Every year he's healthy. He's maybe even made the finals. I can't even remember. He's like always in the right. He's insane.
In HFFL, he's been in the finals the last 4 times he's been healthy.
Yeah, so that's what it comes down to. Are you in the finals if this guy is healthy?
So I'm saying like you can put this team anywhere you want, because I understand your risk tolerance for one guy being like the major core, or like even he could decline, right? Like, so there are multiple ways for this to fail. I understand, like, you could put this team anywhere you want, but if everybody kind of like, again, this is a stupid way to think about it, but if CMC does what he did last year relative to everyone, this team is like a lock for a playoff. That's a big if. So you can put it wherever you want, and I don't really disagree with you.
You're at 5 for me. I think we'll know early. This is one of those teams where you're gonna go like upward and you're there, or downward and you're there, and that's it. I'm sorry. But we'll see. I think this is gonna be an interesting one. This one is a fun one, and that's why maybe I have more fun looking at a roster like this. I love Christian McCaffrey. Everyone knows this.
Dude,
right? So.
People actually kind of
good,
even underestimate how much more, like, because like Gurley was like really good. Like, other running backs have been good, but they've been good when other running backs have also been good, right? Like, CMC's been good in years where like the third running back was like Rashad White. And no offense to like Rashad White, or like Raheem Mostert. No offense to Raheem Mostert.
Some offense.
Those are very
they're
like
different,
fine players, but like. Back when Gurley was good, there were like 4 guys within like 3 points of him. Like, LT, like maybe not that crazy LT year, but like most years there's like, a Priest Holmes or somebody that's like within, shouting reach. Right now, like, if you go off by recent history, it's been such a crazy gap that, I wanted to like try it before the bubble burst completely. But I do understand, like age-wise, not young. Mileage-wise, a lot. Already dealing with a calf injury, has gotten hurt for like entire seasons, like 2 out of the last like 5 or 6 years. I know all that, so like, don't be like, oh, like I knew like that was like, I know it's got a chance of not turning out, but like we were excited to like at least try it, because Wankyu's definitely won a championship on his back. Jay got to the final basically on his back. Like, I don't really think, I mean. Wanky's person.
Oh yeah, that one game
otherwise.
that we had him healthy, that was amazing.
So I forgot that Diaz was actually one of the.
Sorry, when he's healthy.
I think the key is if he gets drafted by Mars. He just needs to not get drafted by Mars. Yeah, he's an Earthling. He's an Earthling all the way.
The salary to me is cheap. That like you can tell what you want from it. I mean, I was hating a little bit, but I think it's cheap to get him for 82.
Yeah,
if he's healthy.
when we were okay playing that strategy of like, okay, like if this guy dies, then we'll just take it, as like, okay, that happens, right? And then just live with what happens, right? when we like kind of agreed on that, like 90 was like on the table
Yes, it's
fairly
90 to me.
easily.
Yep,
So
agree.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was like 90 where we really start have to like being like, okay, then literally our whole season is just one guy. But up to like 80s, 82, like we were like pretty happy that we got him for that price.
Yeah, and you have good
It was
depth behind it.
done,
Yeah,
yeah,
so it's fine.
yeah.
Should be good.
So started the scrubs. Started the scrubs. It's about the scrubs breaking out.
Yes.
You know, some people, you know, obviously everyone's going to disagree on what scrubs are like the nice profile to like break out and stuff, but I do feel like we've, you know, generally been, you know, kind of on it, like to like find the, you know, James Robinsons or like the guys that, you know, start pretty unheralded and then end up pretty usable or like, you know, stuff like that. So I think it does play to our strengths a little bit. I don't think it's something that is a lot to be repeatable every year. So like, you know, we're not going to always pull out like those kind of guys, but I do think we're probably slightly above average at like finding those. So like, we're like, okay, like CMC, this, I mean, he might have already had his last year where he's like a, you know, a hero running back that like carries a whole team. But like, if we think he has like one more year of that, like let's try it, and then let's see if we can supplement him with like breakouts and, you know, Shaheed, like guys that are like really cheap. Like, you know, I think we have a good sense of like what can break out. But yeah, that's obviously going to be a really important part for managing this team to the like championship, regardless of whether CMC is good or not. So
Yep.
we're definitely looking forward to like that style of managing where you're kind of churning through like waivers and like trying to look for like the signs of like a guy that can be legit for a whole season. You know, like that's going to be really what elevates this team to like real contender, or, you know, just like one of the middle tier teams, or, you know, even worse if CMC falters. So
Yep. I
yeah,
completely
I mean,
agree.
we were pretty happy
Completely agree.
with how it turned out. So it'll be fun to see, you know, how it plays out. Either way, like it'll be a story, kind of like, you know, CMC always getting hurt from Mars. It'll be a story like, oh, we fucking hate CMC from now on, or, you know, we'll be like, oh, CMC is like honestly the best thing ever. You know, like it'll be a fun story for I think the league in either direction. So, you know, I'm gonna be playing it up either way. Like even if he,
Join
you know,
us.
yeah, well, maybe we'll see, yeah, we'll vote on how many people hate CMC at the end of his career, and yeah, this is definitely the year that's going to swing me one way or another.
I think you did a really good job with your bench before we move on. I really do think so. But anyways,
Right? Yeah,
yeah, I think it's
I'm
great.
sure everybody feels that way about their guys,
We'll
but
see.
like just to say, like um, Shaheed is also uh, like I know nobody wants to be attached to Derek Carr, but the Saints are another team that changed their offensive coordinator to a Shanahan like disciple,
It's
right?
Kubiak, right? Isn't it
And
Kubiak?
yeah, it is Clint Kubiak, who, you know, people are mixed on whether like he's like one of the good like smart coordinators or not. But like just scheme wise, like I think they're running a fullback, the Saints, which I think only Shanahan teams run a fullback like more than like 30% of the time now. And what a fullback does is it makes you play way less three wide receiver sets, right? Which means that pass targets are usually a lot more concentrated between your top two receivers.
Mm.
So even if the offense is overall bad, just the fact that you're not really kind of siphoning off like 400, 500 yards to a third wide receiver that is useless for fantasy can kind of mean that Olave and Shaheed are fantasy, you know, viable in some way, even if Derek Carr sucks, and even if that offense is like, you know, mid. I mean, it can't be like the worst offense, and it honestly might be, but just like that's like one thing that you know, we identified, and we're like, you know what, this could turn out positively, right? And I think we have like kind of those like outcomes for a lot of our bench, and so we're really excited to see if like, you know, some of that pans out, because if we do get a healthy CMC and the right grubs to like break out, I think we definitely have a chance to compete with you know, Sandy Pines and LIC.
Yep, I'd agree. I'm gonna move on here. I am
Mm-hmm.
also rooting for CMC because I need my QB keeper to make those
Exactly.
passes to CMC. Please be healthy,
Mhm.
please.
Yeah.
But I think, maybe I'm a little bit biased in that way that, I have the 49ers lens. Like, I want CMC to be there. Please help
Mhm.
all my weapons.
Yeah.
Just
Also,
to
he's like
yeah.
a beloved figure in New England for your
Oh man,
franchise.
yeah.
Like
Yeah. He's great.
that first championship for you
Oh man,
was
epic,
glorious.
epic.
Was a CMC year all the way. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, Lamar was big, but like CMC was.
huge.
I mean, CMC is always insane when he's healthy. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, next team
Uh,
stays inside this call.
yeah, yeah. I can start with my team. As I mentioned before, like I made a little bit of a switch in the auction
Mm-hmm.
because I had a sense that things were going a little bit cheaper than I expected. Among that was Brees Hall. So I thought Brees Hall was a little bit cheap. You nailed it, Diaz,
Mm-hmm.
on your simulation. It was about 70, but I thought this was a little bit cheap in my opinion. I think he
Mm-hmm.
has one of the rare potential to be an RB1. We just talked about CMC, but I think he can do it too. The Jets fans are
Yes.
probably gonna go. The Jets fans
Hell yeah.
are probably gonna be very happy about that. But I really do think so. His talent, him, Bijan, which was already kept, and CMC, right? I think those three are in the conversation. I think Brees has a really good chance, or a really good pass catcher, right, in the red zone. So that's where my season is going to be hinged upon, similar to what we just
Yes.
saw in Great
Yeah.
Kills. It's going to lean on Brees. It's going to lean on Lamar yet again. And then I think up and down, it's pretty deep, this roster. And that was the idea, to make it deep, especially in the wide receiver core. Nothing super special. And my wide receiver one is Deebo Samuel, which is great, stacking with Purdy. But it's not as heralded. It's not as amazing as other wide receivers out there in the rest of the league. I have great depth behind it with Deontay, Brian Thomas, Tank Dell, a couple of maybe interesting guys on the bench. But I think the real weakness is my RB2 spot, where I've got a lot of potential guys to fill in. So Zamir White is the guy who I've slotted in right now, but there's a couple of guys on my bench that I think can rise up. And then I don't know why, but I've been spending a lot of time looking at Kyle Pitts. I'm hoping that he's gonna do something. Age 23, he's young, but
I like Pitts
we'll see.
I like Pitts at 10. I like Pitts at 10 more than I like Drake London at 34. And I like both of them value. Like I think they're both at least fine value wise. Like I don't think Drake London 34 is like a bad value, but I think there's a lot of upside with Kyle Pitts at 10 because if all the arguments you can make for Cousins and Drake London, I think like most of them apply to Kyle Pitts. And like who's the second target other than Bijan like in Atlanta? It's probably Pitts, right? And like if Cousins plays to form, he can definitely support like two pretty good like pass catching options like outside of the backfield, right? So I actually did like that value and that pick. Yeah.
Well, it's Kyle Pitts if Kyle Pitts is good. Do we think Kyle like? There's a
I don't-
reason that Jonnu Smith was on the field last year. It's not
True.
because he's friends.
Is he better
with,
than? This is actually maybe not true. Is he better than Daryl Mooney and Darnell Mooney or whatever?
yeah,
he is?
I don't
And-
know. It's been
You don't know?
what,
Okay.
3-4 years since he was this generational talent.
Mhm.
He suffered a severe injury, and it might not be a situation where he ever comes back to what he was at Florida.
I think
True.
he's a wide receiver, which is
He is,
where Arthur Smith messed up. And Arthur Smith wanted tight ends. Jonnu, I mean, he can catch the ball and he's great too, but he was maybe a little bit more of a tight end, a more traditional. Pitts should be lining up as a wide receiver. He should be a wide receiver.
He should line up outside more because when he goes
Outside,
inside, he gets covered by safeties and linebackers, and he can't shake safeties and linebackers
No.
or he can't overpower them, and his size, like he's not shaking them consistently enough. Outside, he could at least just outman them and like force them to either cover him with a cornerback where he actually has a size advantage, or bring a safety out, which should do a lot of help for I think their overall offense and their run game. So I agree. I do think like it's not. Is he? I mean, like he probably isn't as good as like he was or he definitely isn't as good as once he was touted to be. But it's not like, oh, is he worse than Jonnu? It's kind of like, Arthur Smith had a very specific way he wanted to use tight ends, and like even if he didn't line Pitts up on the line, he used him in the slot like way more than I think he should have, because the slot still allows you to like bring over nickelbacks that are a little bit sturdier, or like linebackers, or I think he just doesn't have the advantage out there. But yeah, no, I think it's a valid point. Like, is Pitts good? Like, so maybe this, like, I'm not saying this is like a home run, but I do think like
no, at 10 it's good.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
at 10
this isn't gonna
what
kill
I'm
me.
saying. Like,
Whereas the money's on Lamar and Brees, right? I think that's
right.
where it is. And plus,
I think that
I forgot
I
Waddle
think the
too.
downside of
yeah.
Pitts being bad is like fine at 10, and Pitts being good is going to be a lot better than 10. So I mean, that's one part I like. I think you also like, I think you had like the Bears cupboard coming into the draft. Like, I think your keepers that you did have were pretty good, but like one you got in a trade for just Fab, which like kind of fell into your lap, and the other one, Brock Purdy, who I do like, but some people like don't know if he could maintain his like efficiency, and like is he his volume's not going to be that big, so like do we have some regression there or not? But I think for the price, it's still pretty good. But like in terms of like what people did in the actual auction draft and not like keepers that they brought in, I actually liked New England's draft like maybe the most, because I think he got like really good value on like a lot of spots. He chose like two superstar studs, like heroes to go for, and I don't think he like overpaid for them. Like, you might have your arguments about like, oh, I would prefer to play a little less for one of these two guys, but like I don't think he overpaid at least, and then he hammered value all the way down, which like I think Deontay for 11, there's some upside there. Debo for 36, I think he's probably worth more than that most years, but like I think people were just kind of a little bit confused by the 49ers offense in general, with the holdouts and like like what's going on with like their rookies and stuff. And like down the line, like I just think like most of the players that you picked up are like pretty cheap from that point on, but like I see the vision, I see the line for like all of them. So I think in some ways it is similar to like Greg Hills, like in that like some of these guys down the line are gonna have like Zamir White maybe like is better than what like some people think, or maybe Eckler has a dead cat bounce or something like that. I think like one or two of those are gonna have to really hit, because you did spend a lot on like two guys, but I see the line for all of them, and I think you really got like good value in the spots that you kind of went above like a $9 or $10 bid.
Yep. Diaz, do you have anything to add?
Quick question. You mentioned earlier that you love Rome Odunze. You drafted Keenan Allen. What do you think of that Bears offense? You think it's just going to be that explosive?
Oh yeah, great question. Yeah, I think it will be. I love Caleb Williams. Like I said, I love Rome Odunze. I think Keenan Allen's going to be great. I'm not mentioning one name here with DJ Moore.
DJ Moore you don't like.
Think he's going to be the one who suffers, in my opinion. I think it's going to be those two guys who eat more than the others. But I could be wrong. We'll see.
Classic Wankyu take. No, that's pure Wankyu. That's great.
I think for 10 on Keenan Allen, like even if I think he's like the third guy there, I'm fine with that kind of like throw, because like the upside of it is still pretty good. Like he was still good up until last year. Like 10 is like not his floor, but like definitely not like anywhere near what his ceiling is, right? So
he was top 10 last year.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah. Great value if he's anything approaching that. Yeah.
So
for me,
I think he. Yeah. Go ahead.
No Bears, no Steelers. That's just I don't do those teams.
No Russian.
Wow. No Bears, no Steelers. Wow.
Those are your two teams. I think everyone has like kind of like I don't want to like cheer for this team or like have investment in this team, because like it's just ugly. Even when it's like certain points, you're just like miserable and like barely squeezing them out. and it's never like ever like explosive. So like Bears are probably on a lot of lists. To
Wow.
be fair, I mean they are one of the more ineptly run. Like other than the Jets, like Bears probably in the last like
True.
10 years are the most inept, right?
Yeah.
I mean they might be more than the Jets, honestly. Like I think you have good argument for that.
no
It's
QBs
been
though.
I think
since
the
Jay
Panthers are
Cutler.
the
Yeah.
Yeah, Jay
yeah
Cutler. Yeah.
Panthers are like the new Bears maybe, but like yeah I think a lot of people have been burned on Bears quite a bit. Allen Robinson
Oh
was a
yeah.
big one, right? He like
Yeah.
fell
Oh yeah.
apart on the Bears, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I like he's not just the only one. There's kind of plenty of like young rookie QBs that I feel like they've mishandled or mispicked or like whatever
Oh,
you think it is.
Trubisky.
Like
Yeah. So
yeah, like
that's why I actually didn't like my draft a little bit. Was my
mhm,
two teams I didn't want to draft was Carolina and New England, and I picked up
mhm.
players from both. I got rid of the New England one, and then also I usually don't do any Jets player, but this year was the first. Well, I
Yeah,
put a lot on
Good
a Jets
strategy.
player,
yeah,
so
yeah,
I do feel uneasy. I have to say, so
yeah.
that's where I'm
No,
hating
so
my own team.
for
Yeah.
you, you're gonna either hate the Jets like definitively after this year, or
Yes.
it'll break your hate for or like your
Correct.
distrust of them. One or the
Correct.
other. Like for me, CMC is either shit list or hero. For you, it's the whole
Jets.
Jets org on the line for you
Yes.
because like
Yep.
even if Brees Hall sucks, you're gonna be like it's because the Jets.
It's because.
If he gets hurt, it's because the Jets. It's all just because the Jets, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's
Donovan and
gonna be
I have
pretty
been
funny.
talking about it, and he, he maybe influenced me a little bit. He is on the
Hmm.
Jets, bandwagon, of course, as a fan. But like, it's gonna be interesting. Last thing before we move on is already I'm dealing with salary cap issues.
Oh, that's actually what I was gonna say, like too. I think it's understandable to rank this team lower in the power
Yeah,
rankings
it should.
because he's dealing with $40 in dead
Oh
cap
no.
before the season, which means like any cuts of. Luckily, you have no players that would get too much of a cap hit because you went really
Pitts.
cheap after. That's actually a really good way to handle it. Like you have a lot of under 10 salary guys. But yeah, this is going to hamstring your ability to really improve your team through trades too much because you're going to have to like dance around salary cap from day one. Like this is probably the biggest reason that I would have it maybe in the lower, you know, half of the 8 I said. Even though I think your draft, like just pure auction draft, I think value wise, like it was one of my favorites. But like the $40 dead cap is going to be a challenge. So I would probably have it a little bit on like the lower half of my power rankings.
Yep, completely agree. Absolutely agree.
40 is insane.
That's a bit much. All right, let's move to Williston. Williston
Mhm.
Park. I don't remember their roster as much. Oh, now I do.
Wow.
Who, who? Diaz, you want to start here?
The disrespect.
I just forgot. Yeah. Anyways, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, we established you don't like DJ Moore.
Yep.
You
I
guys are playing each other week 1, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
So
so
you're
that's
gonna learn this roster, and they have Caleb Williams, who you love.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think the $5 Aaron Rodgers I think is a good gamble. I like that. And if Aaron Rodgers is good, then Garrett Wilson could blow up, which is great. Rashee Rice has been a roller coaster, but it looks like he's going to play the full season. And at $12, that's a huge advantage in my mind. So I could definitely see this quarterback combination really carrying the team. And the wide receivers have some potential, and Trey McBride I think is underappreciated as well. He could be top 1 at his position.
I think so too.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Because
yeah. So I think part of the problem is some of the like he got a lot of guys in the mid range, right? Like guys like from like high 30s to like mid 20s, right? Those are always really hard to kind of evaluate. Like half of them are going to turn out terrible values, and half of them are going to turn out
Jenny.
like pretty good values, and it's. I mean, if everyone
Jenny.
knew like right now, obviously they would have
I
just
think
gone
we're gonna
for
be 6:30.
different
Could
values,
you give me
right?
my
So
phone?
it is like a very
I think it's gonna
swingy
be
team in terms of
6:30.
like
Could you give me
that.
my phone? We just ordered
Like
delivery.
Pittman, McLaurin, and
Oh,
more. I all
I think
see
it's gonna be
like
6:30.
could outperform their numbers
Yeah,
or
yeah. I think
could
it's gonna be
kind of like
6:30. We're sitting forever.
be a little bit, of anchors for like a team that you know needs like good performance out of those guys. And I think Garrett Wilson is going to be a big linchpin for this team. A lot of people are expecting him
It's
to make
getting
a huge
charged,
step
but it's
up with
okay.
Aaron
It's okay.
Rodgers. Talent wise, people have him pegged pretty high. He's going to have to prove it. He's going to have to show that he can really put up those top numbers, and it was all Zach Wilson's fault. I'm not saying it wasn't. I'm just saying like if Rodgers is anywhere near what people expect and like just even baseline better than Zach Wilson, we're gonna have to see a big year from Wilson, and I definitely actually think he does have the talent to do it. So that's gonna be a big point for Wilson Park. I think he did enough like everywhere here where I don't think he has like have as much of a this one thing is gonna like sink him like, oh, he needs this one thing to like go right. I think he just needs like a lot of his pieces to kind of like play a little bit above what consensus might have been for him to really be a contender. But it's a pretty well rounded team that has like no terrible spots that I'm like, oh, like I don't like that this guy is like on this team or starting at all. So pretty well rounded team. He has that Hawkinson stashed $1, so we'll see if like that turns out to be a chip for him later. He's one of the teams with maybe two startable tight ends if Hawkinson does return and show himself to be viable. So yeah, I mean this is definitely a big will see team for me. Like I find it hard to like definitively go high on them or go low on them. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think for me the big issue is the QB.
Mm-hmm.
I did mention I like Caleb Williams, but
Yeah, I thought you liked Caleb Williams.
I do, but Joe Burrow,
Oh, Joe Burrow.
I am concerned about his injury, and this is
Jake is
like
about to get a little hot.
a sneak preview of my write up. But I mean,
Uh,
if you can't throw the ball for 3 days in a row, I'm not drafting you. And
Sure,
he
that is a
had,
pretty big part of being a quarterback.
yeah, it's on his right wrist. He needs to manage this injury. They say that it's going to be inflamed on and off for at least a year, and that also there's a higher risk of re-injury if someone falls on it. So
Yeah, and he gets destroyed on sacks sometimes too.
I'm very skeptical when you put a lot of chips on that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's where a lot of my maybe quote unquote hate for the team is. We already talked about DJ
Yeah.
Moore, but I'm again a little skeptical of the backfield here. Tony Pollard, I think he's going to be in a straight split with Spears, and then
Mm-hmm.
Mixon. I mean, he could maybe I can't remember how well he did last year, but I'm not too thrilled. So that's where I'm taking it. I think there are some interesting names. I do like a couple of these players, like I mentioned. Caleb Williams, I think, is going to be good, and Pittman's going to be great. Wilson's a stud, right? So I think there's a number of very interesting names, but overall,
Right.
I feel like they're starting a little bit behind in certain players. So you
Mm-hmm.
have to make up for that a little bit in terms of the salary, at least, right? Like I think if it was a
Yeah.
little bit cheaper, more manageable, like let's say if Burrow was a cheaper keeper, then maybe that could offset that risk. But to me, it's a little bit risky once you start getting past the $50 mark. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where I fall with this team. But um, uh, let's move on because I have to get going pretty soon here.
Yeah.
Um, sorry guys, near the end, but Yonkers.
Yep. Runner up last year. I'll just give my thoughts real quick. This is all. These teams. They're low for me, not because they're necessarily outright bad. These are harder to have like like definitively like strong takes on like certain of their players. Like again, like this tier of like 40 to like you know mid 20s and like even high teens. If people knew like those like who was gonna be good, like they just would have gone like that. It just shows that like a lot of these players are, you know, a lot lower for some people and a lot higher for some people. And it's really just gonna bank on like if you have like 5 or 6 of these, how many of those are gonna end up being like, you know, very upper tier players, right? Like, and I certainly see the argument with some of these guys, but it definitely kind of just feels like last year's team minus TMC. Is that rude to say? 'Cause,
Oof.
um,
Oof.
like yeah, that I mean I think that's probably why he's like getting ranked a little bit low because like you know like it was a like pretty good team around CMC, but it certainly wasn't. You know, it didn't have that oomph. There's no like star power here where I'm like, oh, this guy's gonna like you know carry this team to win some weeks, right? Like it's hard to find that guy necessarily. Like I don't in a vacuum hate a lot of these guys. Like in the context of like other teams, I would actually you know really like some of these guys, but uh, his
Yeah.
best player is old Kelsey or Josh Jacobs, who you know has some you know efficiency issues and wasn't great last year. Same with Devontae. Like it's a lot of guys that I'm like I'm not so sure if any of these guys are like gonna carry him. So he needs like so many of these like mid guys to like turn out better than their like salary. So while other teams might need like you know 1 or 2 out of your like 3 or 4, he needs like 5 out of like 6 or 5 out of 7 guys in that middle tier to kind of like outperform. So you know this team did end up like lower in my mental rankings too. But I think it is pretty good sign of how close a lot of teams are. But I just don't see the sexy appeal at like a quick glance.
Yeah, I think that's the maybe it's a really slight difference, but there is a difference, right? That
Yeah,
between
yeah,
the 3 to 10 that you were saying,
hmm
that's unfortunately
yeah,
what it comes down to make these rankings. And yeah, like I completely agree. I think when I look at this team, it looks like almost LIC light because you've got
yep,
weak QB or weaker QBs compared to what people are thinking, but they're not as good. You got running backs. Well, I guess the running backs are better than LICs, actually. But then the wide receivers are definitely weaker, for
Mhm.
sure. So it's trying to win with its running backs, wide receivers, tight end. But like you said, the win condition is split between the top three: Jacobs, Adams,
yeah.
and Kelsey. And I don't know if that's good enough in
Yeah, I look at this
right
roster
now.
and I'm like, if there was one like you know real like kind of stud player, this I would like actually love this roster because it's like pretty well covered, like you
True.
know up and down the roster, but it it lacks a little bit of punch for like this like strategy of like going really kind of like wide and like decent or good at like every spot. I think just a little bit, but yeah, I'm facing him week 1, so he's probably gonna drop like 300 points, and then there'd be like 4 players that put up over 50, and I'm like, okay, I guess these are all stars. Never mind.
Go ahead, Diaz. Finish it
Yeah,
off.
Well,
Diaz.
Finish it off.
your point is driven home by the decision made to not press the advantage that he gained from drafting Brock Bowers in the first round of the rookie draft, which is
That's
this
also
is
yeah.
this is a player who theoretically you should be able to start from jump, or
Mm-hmm.
you would expect to be a starter for most of the season. If you're
Mm-hmm.
going to draft him with the first pick in your with your first rookie pick, that's what you're probably aiming for. And
That's actually a
I think
really good point. Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
people would view Browers in that way, and personally, I did going into the draft. So when you select,
Even if you
yeah,
don't, like your win condition kind of has to be based around that happening. If you're not starting with like an overwhelming keeper
Yeah.
advantage, like
Yeah.
you kind of need to be like, okay, like realistically, I need like this to happen. Otherwise, like my team will probably be like, you know, middle of the pack maybe, or like, you know, a little bit short of like actual contender. So like you kind of have to be like, okay, so like let's just assume that Bowers is like a startable good tight end because like if he's not, then I'm probably not in a great position anyway. And then like you kind of have to build out for that. So Kelsey's kind of like the wrong player for this team like entirely. Yeah, I kind of get that point pretty clearly. Yeah.
yeah. So what we see here is that the upside is capped, and when you
Mm-hmm.
get guys who are in the $30 to $40 range, the reason that
Mm-hmm.
they go for those prices is because they don't generally have the top five upside.
Right.
You look at the guys up and down this roster. Devontae Adams, he's good. Yeah, he's solid. Can he be a top five wide receiver? You got to squint real hard to see that. this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, hear you. And that's true, right? For, again, Kelsey, Jacobs. And again, that's how he's going to try and win week to week. It is, now that I'm looking at this again, it is gonna be a bit of an ask. So, tough.
Yeah.
But let's see. Again, you're facing in week 1, so good luck. You never know,
Yeah.
right? Same thing for me shitting all over Wilson Park.
Yeah.
I'm going to get demolished by DJ Moore.
The beauty of the show.
All right, here we go with last but not least, or maybe it is least, Orange County to round it out.
Quick thought.
Man, we are. I feel like I've been hating a lot today, but but I think,
You had him last. So.
I mean, there are a couple of players that I really do like from this team. Like Mahomes, obviously, there's no question, and then Cooper Kupp. I think that's a great price for Cooper Kupp. But then after that, I'm a little confused as to what happened. Like, why is I'm just gonna ask questions. Why is Devin Singletary starting? What is going on? And Taysom Hill, like,
Yo, Devin Singletary is good.
Wait, hold up. Hold up. But is he a starter?
Ideally,
maybe
no.
he is. Wait, what?
Oh, you're talking about in the NFL? Yeah, he's gonna get all the carries.
No. I mean,
Giants.
For the Giants. Okay, so Giants were on my do not draft list as well. I forgot. The Giants?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm a little skeptical. I
think he's gonna be solid week to week.
Okay.
I think for a running back 4 for him, right? Because he has Gibbs, James Conner, and David Montgomery. It's not bad. Like, he won't start for most weeks.
Okay.
He might be right now because his roster construction.
Yeah. That's better.
So I don't hate this team. I'll give you my perspective. I think it does need some things to go right. Like Trevor Lawrence, everyone's been kind of waiting for a jump, and we haven't really seen it. But he's gonna, like, Orange County's gonna need it if they contend. Same for Cooper Kupp. People are saying, it's Puka now. It's Kupp is a little bit older. He doesn't have that wide receiver 1 potential anymore. But if he does, if it took him a year to kind of really get healthy, and talent wise, if he's just better than Puka, and like him and Stafford kind of just rekindle that connection they had, I think those are the kind of things that need to happen. But the difference between Orange County and unfortunately the 2 teams before, I can see the path a little bit. Maybe Mahomes has a statement year after a down kind of regular season. He gets some weapons back, Mahomes, and maybe he has a QB1 season. Trevor Lawrence, it didn't break out for him the last couple of years, but he's definitely talented enough for it to click, right? Cooper Kupp, I gave my point on that, and then the rest of the team is obviously Gibbs has to be kind of what Duo was hoping for, but the rest of the team, I think, is a lot of good and okay and even unexciting. But if those earlier things happen and I can squint enough to kind of see it, I think this team does have a chance. I don't have a way to squint that hard for Yonkers or Wilson Park, even though I think those teams are probably baseline safer floors and pretty. They're not going to be embarrassingly bad. Orange County could be embarrassingly bad if more than half of the things I said don't come true. But right, do you disagree that some of those things, even if I wouldn't bet on them, they're feasible, right?
They're
feasible. Tell me if I'm wrong.
But I think
the upside is there.
The problem is that there's too many ifs. Other than Mahomes, there's an if statement for all of these guys down the line, right?
Sure. Yeah,
so that's where I think the problem really lies. I mean, even if I give Cooper Kupp, and I like Cooper Kupp, okay, I'll say he's a top wide receiver. Still, you have too many guys who I think ifs.
There's no real reason to think a lot of the other ones that I said are really gonna happen this year. But I am just saying there is that high end upside at least.
There is.
So if you're trying to bet on okay, which team is gonna average the most wins over the season, this team is probably towards the bottom. If you try run a season 100 times and tell me which team won the championship most. This team probably wins the championship more often than Yonkers
It could.
and
Yeah. You're right.
Wilson Park. In my book,
Yeah. High
I think
risk.
there's a lot of opinion that can change.
Yeah.
What you think is upsidey. Like I obviously have certain views on what has upside, and other people can disagree. But I'm just saying, like that's how I kind of separate these last three teams. Like Yonkers and Williston, I actually kind of like their team overall, but I just don't see what has to pop for them to really be a contender. Orange County, I think, could have a pretty miserable season if some of these things go wrong. But like there is like a scenario where a lot of these things like carry them to like the top 4, top 3.
Yeah,
so
that's a good point.
that's just my take on it.
Yeah, the floor is scary. Yeah, go ahead, Diaz.
Yeah, the floor is scary.
I'm just saying, Deshaun Watson has been traded for Tyreek Hill in the past. Maybe it'll happen again.
Oh, imagine if Deshaun
damn,
Watson actually has like a sick comeback year. Would that make you hate him more?
Yes.
Okay. It would be
everything he does will make me hate him more. There's nothing he can do to make
other than going to like jail, right? Like that would probably make you appreciate him owning up to like his stuff. But yeah, it's definitely gonna be a little bit more exciting, I think, this team than some others, just because like it has huge flop potential, and then huge like not huge, but like there are some scenarios where some of these pieces turn out to be like, oh shit, like Cooper Kupp is still the wide receiver in the league, huh? Like we kind of discounted that a little bit too much. Like there is a world where that happens, So, yeah, I mean that's my overall take.
I think it's
a lot of parity though, for sure.
For sure. I think it's interesting bringing up Deshaun Watson, though, because I wonder to myself if he had just leaned into Deshaun Watson as his QB2. I mean, I guess it's hard because Trevor Lawrence was a keeper. But, like, if he did do that, you just answer is no.
No.
But I feel like I would have liked it more because then you're just saying, you can put the dollars on the other spots on the roster. But I don't know.
I agree.
I'm not sure. It's a bit...
Basically, though, Duo kind of gets, like, the idea of, like, okay, if my keepers aren't good to start, I have to like take wilder swings.
Yeah, that's true.
There's no value in finishing like 7th or 8th instead of like 10th. I mean, like maybe a little bit of value, but like Duo, I think gets in concept like oh, you got to just take bigger swings. You're right that I wish I could have seen him lean into it more, like not having Trevor Lawrence, maybe stacking up a little bit more somewhere, just so like you kind of like double up on the good outcome, like.
There's Worthy, but like, I don't know. Anyways, yeah.
Right. No, I like a Cousins and like Drake London combo, like no matter how expensive, like if that turns out as well as like a lot of people think it can, that could be like a QB1 and a wide receiver 1 in one package. And you just need the one thing to go right, which is like basically Cousins has to be, as good as he's been over the last 3 years when healthy, and like he has to that's like one thing that needs to go right, and he would get value from 2 things. So I think that's the one thing I wish Duo did more here. I wish he took a little bit more like stacked outcomes where you benefit twice, even if it's like not that likely to happen. Like that really gives you a good chance. But I do think he still has enough upside where I don't hate the team. Yeah, I think there's some fun stuff to look forward to for him.
Yeah, where's Christian Kirk? I would have loved to see Christian Kirk here, right? Like
You gotta stack up somewhere. Yeah,
it's all good.
I got you, Duho. Hit me up.
Yeah, you got him for a good price too. So yeah, I think I think that pretty much sums it up. Can't wait to after all these rankings to get owned by all the teams that we thought were not.
Yeah. and Written rankings should be out mid or early this upcoming week, like in the next probably 2 days or so. So people can look forward to that. This show definitely did go on along, but I'm excited just for the season to start, just to like start, the narratives again, and like seeing like there's just like so much in the league I think to enjoy now, even if it's like not within my own team. I just kind of feel like I enjoy like seeing certain teams do their thing, like, oh, that's such a John move, or that's such a Duho move. Like those are so fun to like watch. So I'm really looking forward to that too.
Yep. Not much more to add. Diaz, did you want to say anything before we close?
No, thanks, guys. Thank
you for coming on always at the beginning of the season. We'll probably end the show here to go on pretty long. And I will be kind of like, trying to set up like little mini shows. Like it's gonna be shorter. I mean, shorter than this for sure, but like shorter than like longer formats. But I'm gonna try to do something once a week with different groups of people. So I'll like explain a little bit more later on. But yeah, people should be looking forward to like a little bit more variety of like styles of like content throughout the season. I'm gonna get a little bit ahead on that this year. So.
Cool. Sounds good. Looking forward to it. And thanks again, both of you guys. Can't wait for the start of the season. Let's do it.
All right. Thank you. Great show.